They wear the uniform. They carry the radio. They patrol the trails most of you will never walk. But out there, past the last trailhead, deep where the cell signal dies, something watches them back. Welcome, wanderers. I'm Mr. Bell, and you've just stepped into Sir Bellico, where every shadow has a story and every ranger has a secret. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? What time is it where you are? Now turn off the lights and don't look behind you. The bitter cold nips at my exposed skin as I trudge through the dense Alaskan wilderness. It's part of the job as a park ranger, but today feels different. An eerie stillness hangs in the frigid air, broken only by the crunch of my boots in the snow and the occasional distant caw of a raven. I'm out here alone, hiking to a remote patrol cabin to check on things after reports of strange activity in the area. It's early May, that transition time when winter still clings on stubbornly even as spring tries to take hold. Skeletal branches claw at a leaden sky. Lingering patches of snow mottle the forest floor. An involuntary shiver runs through me, and not just from the cold. I can't shake the uncanny feeling of being watched, though I've seen no signs of any people or animals. Just an oppressive sense of something lurking in the shadows of the towering spruces and pines. I quicken my pace, eager to reach my destination before dark. After another hour of steady hiking, I pause at the bank of a half-frozen stream to refill my water and check the map. The gorge looks different than what I remember from past treks out here. Deeper, more jagged, like something massive carved through here in a frenzy. I shake off the fanciful thought and march onward. As the weak light filtering through the canopy begins to fade, my unease grows. Animal tracks crisscross the snow, elk, hares, foxes. But then I spot a print that stops me cold. Twice the size of my splayed hand, with long gashes at the tips. Not from any creature I know of that roams these woods. A twig snaps in the underbrush behind me. I spin around, fumbling for the bear spray at my hip. Hello? Is someone there? My voice echoes plaintively through the trees. I strain to listen, but only silence answers back. With a deep breath, I continue forward, wariness now sharpening my senses. Just as the first shadows of dusk creep in, I catch a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. I whip my head toward it. Some 50 yards off the trail, an indistinct figure stands half obscured behind a massive trunk, bipedal but hunched and strangely elongated. My heart pounds in my ears as I blink rapidly, wondering if my eyes deceive me. In that split second, the shape vanishes. A trick of the fading light. Animal. Man. I'm not sure I want to know. I hoist my pack and hike faster, unnerved to my core. The fading glow through conifers signals my light is almost gone. I've wandered a bit off course, rattled by that. Whatever it was I saw. Or imagined I saw. Need to get my bearings and set up camp soon. I crest a small rise using my trekking poles for balance and survey the forest sprawling out below. My eyes catch on an anomaly. A grove of trees maybe a quarter-mile ahead and slightly east. Trunks stripped bare like pale bones jutting up from the earth. Surrounding vegetation looks withered and gray, almost like something poisoned the soil. An icy rivulet of apprehension snakes down my spine. In all my time ranging across this wilderness, I've never seen a patch of forest like that. Certainly nothing that could blight a swath of hardy conifers so severely. I'm debating going for a closer look when the crunch of footsteps makes me whirl around. A hunched figure in a tattered parka approaches. Wisps of white hair snake out from under his fur-lined hood. Watery blue eyes glitter in a weathered face as he raises a mittened hand. "Storm's blowing in," he croaks, voice gravelly with age and disuse. "Best be careful out here, young fella. Strange things wander these woods, especially when the light gets dim." I nod slowly. "Thanks for the warning. I'm a ranger, well-equipped for weather. You a trapper? Local?" The man looks like he's spent a long, hard lifetime in the Alaskan bush. "Been here long time," he responds cryptically. His eyes shift, never quite meeting mine, gaze darting between the trees. Long enough to know when to keep moving and when to hunker tight. Things are getting a bit unsettled out this way lately. Decades of isolation have clearly taken a psychological toll. Before I can inquire further, he turns and begins shuffling away, joints creaking. Stay on the path, Ranger. Don't be wandering too far off no matter what you think you see or hear. Wait, what do you mean by that? I call after him, uneasy prickle intensifying. But he simply raises a hand without looking back and vanishes into the lengthening shadows. Gripping my trekking poles, I turn and push onwards through the deepening dusk. As full dark descends, I click on my headlamp, the bobbing orb of light only seeming to accentuate the clinging blackness. The temperature plummets, my breath puffing out in thick clouds. And then I hear it. A distant, mournful howl. It starts low, then rises in pitch to an almost human-like wail before tapering off. Every hair on my body stands on end. In all my years of experience, I've never heard any animal make a sound like that. Unthinking, my legs begin pumping faster, boots crunching on the frosty ground. Need to find a decent spot to make camp. Set up my tent. Get a fire going. But as I cast my light around, seeking level ground, it reflects back at me. Pinpricks of emerald green, multiple sets, surrounding me in the darkness, unblinking, tracking my every move. Icy talons of fear rake down my back. I spin in a slow circle, breath rasping in my lungs. The moment stretches, and then, between one blink and the next, the watchful eyes vanish. Branches sway, twigs snap, something very large, moving very quickly, but staying concealed. Heart hammering against my ribs, I stumble forwards, no longer caring about finding the perfect site. I yank out my tent with trembling hands, struggling to assemble the poles and stake the corners by touch, all the while straining my ears for any sound of approach. The night presses in like a living thing, full of whispers and murmurs, or maybe that's just the blood pounding in my head. At last I crawl inside, frantically zipping the flap closed. I curl into my sleeping bag, fully clothed, too shaken to even contemplate a fire. Exhaustion finally drags me into a fitful doze plagued by shadowy figures darting between twisted trees. Gray light filters through the tent's thin nylon when I snap awake. For a moment I lay there blinking, trying to place the source of my unease. Then the memories of the night before come flooding back. The strange tracks, the cryptic old man, the feeling of being stalked by some creature in the darkness. A shudder runs through me that has nothing to do with the cold. Stiffly, I clamber out of my bag and unzip the flap. The morning is bleak and colorless, heavy clouds sagging low over the treetops. A stiff breeze sighs through the pines, carrying the scent of approaching snow. I recall the old trapper's warning about a storm blowing in. Scanning my surroundings, I'm uncertain whether to feel comforted or disturbed by the absence of any animal tracks near my campsite. As I hastily pack up and wolf down an energy bar with some tepid water, a thought niggles at me. Did I, in my haste and disorientation last night, accidentally wander off the meager trail? Pulling out my map and compass, a lead weight settles in my gut. The terrain doesn't match up with where I thought I was. I must have veered east, toward that unnerving patch of blighted forest. I shake my head, stuffing down the flickers of paranoia. I'm a seasoned ranger, more than capable of orienting myself and getting back on track. Yet as I hike, the uneasy sensation persists. The hushed stillness of the forest feels more ominous than peaceful, like a dark force holding its breath and watching. By midday, I have to acknowledge I'm well and truly lost. Angry at myself, I stop to get my bearings and take stock of my supplies. Enough to last a couple days if I ration carefully. I'll follow the stream, standard procedure for reorienting. Just as I bend to refill my bottles, a flash of color catches my eye. Snagged on an exposed root at the water's edge dangles a scrap of weathered blue fabric. A chill ripples through me. It looks like part of a backpack or tent. With mounting trepidation, I scan the bank and spot the remains of a small fire ring, almost concealed beneath a layer of leaves and pine needles. Someone camped here, and not all that long ago by the looks of it. Park rangers? Another lost hunter or hiker? I root around but find no other clues as to their identity or fate. The bizarreness of another camp set up so nearby, with no signs anyone passed by my tent in the night, makes my stomach churn. I can't suppress the sense of being toyed with. Herded. As I stare at the lonely shred of blue cloth fluttering in the breeze, a trickle of icy fear slips down my spine. Hastily repacking, I shoulder my supplies and plunge forward. Afternoon fades toward evening. The temperature drops and the wind picks up, fat flakes beginning to spiral down from the iron-colored sky. As the light leaches away, foreign sounds filter through the trees, creaks and groans, snaps of broken branches, and a snuffling, somehow both animal and not. Whirling toward a particularly loud crack, I catch a glimpse of a hulking figure moving through the shadows, loose-limbed and strangely fluid. A hoarse, almost human cry echoes, raising every hair on my nape. I fumble for my bear spray with one hand, unclipping my knife with the other. "Hello, I'm a park ranger. Do you need assistance?" My voice cracks, all authority fleeing. In response, a guttural growl vibrates from the underbrush like no sound I've ever heard. Definitely not human, but like no animal I know either. The snarl rises in volume before breaking off into a chilling screech. Then, with a thrashing of brush, heavy footfalls bound away into the forest. Pulse thundering, I cast around wildly, but no further signs of the creature appear. Snow is falling faster now, and despite my fear, I know I have to make camp before full dark, and the storm hits. With fumbling hands, I manage to pitch my tent and crawl inside just as the last of the ashen light fades. The mournful howl of the wind batters at my tent, but it's not the storm that keeps me huddled in my bag, incapable of sleep. It's the persistent feeling of something lurking in the darkness just beyond that flimsy shell of nylon. Twice more I've heard that hoarse animal cry. Closer each time, I think, although it's hard to pinpoint with the winds shrieking. And underneath it, almost drowned out, a constant muffled shuffling. Like something pacing restlessly around my campsite. Circling. I imagine I feel its weight every time it passes, the shudder of its footfalls. My heart thumps a panicked tattoo against my ribs in the blackness. I don't dare turn on my light to check my watch, but it must be nearing dawn by now. The longest, most terrifying night of my life. I've faced down my share of threats in the backcountry, grizzlies, winter storms, even armed and intoxicated hunters. But none have shaken me like this. The wind momentarily lulls. In the beat of near silence, from very nearby, comes the sound of my tent zipper slowly, deliberately being drawn down. My body goes rigid. I didn't imagine that. Something is opening my tent. I scrabble for my knife with one violently trembling hand, the other clamping over my mouth to hold in a scream. The zipper reaches its base. The nylon flap flutters but holds for an eternal instant. Then it peels back, a waft of frigid air swirling in. "Ranger." The sibilant whisper makes every cell in my body turn to ice. The word is exhaled on a gust of fetid breath that can only be described as rotting meat. No human could produce a stench like that, but it spoke. It said my title. Bizarrely, I flash to my training for bear encounters. Don't run, don't scream, stand your ground. Shaking uncontrollably, but determined not to cower, I fumble for my flashlight. I click it on, casting the beam toward the gap in the flap, dreading what I'll see. The light glints off eyes, not animal eyes flashing in the dark, that iridescent shine I know well. These are dull, milky orbs set deep in shadowed sockets. They stare back at me, unblinking, in what I can just make out is a distorted human-like face. No, a parody of a human face. Features are jumbled, blurred, nose too broad and flat, cheeks sunken beneath jutting bones. Slightly elongated jaw, lips peeled back to reveal a double row of square, blunt teeth that don't belong in any natural creature's mouth. As I gape in abject horror, those awful eyes abruptly shift away. The thing utters a low grunt. Then the tent flap is flung wide, and it's gone. A huge dark shape bounding off into the night. Bile surges up my throat. I expel it with a strangled cry, folding over in the sleeping bag that now feels like a flimsy shroud. Terror, unlike anything I've ever known, sinks its teeth into my guts. I've just come face to face with something that cannot exist, something that defies laws of nature and sanity. With a small moan, I realize I didn't check my supplies. Apprehension gnawing like rats in my stomach, I slowly unzip my pack. The beacon is there. The granola bar and spare socks are not. That thing rooted through my gear, took random items, recognizing their purpose, toying with me. The insidious implications make my head reel. Abandoning any notion of sleep, I huddle in my bag, listening to the wind howl. It sounds like a roar of laughter to my ears. As the first pale streaks of a leaden dawn reach into my tent, I know I'm far from safe. This was just the first round. The storm still hasn't abated when I hastily break camp at first light. It's difficult to say what's falling harder, snow or my hammering pulse. Despite bitter winds and the fresh layer of white blanketing the ground, I know I can't stay put. Can't remain a sitting duck for the thing that stalked my tent all night. I have to get to that ranger cabin, radio for help if by some small mercy it's functional. My memory is hazy, but I estimate the shelter is northwest of my position. With no trails or markers to follow, I'll have to rely on dead reckoning to bushwhack my way there through dense terrain, all while keeping alert for a creature that seems to bend the laws of nature. The forest feels alive with malice as I set out, as if the trees themselves have turned into hostile watchers. Snow conceals potential perils underfoot, each step an act of faith. Abrasive crystals sting my wind-chapped cheeks, my world narrowed to the few yards I can see ahead. It soon becomes apparent that, even with the snow, something is tracking me. At first, it's just a sense of being surveilled, an itch between my shoulder blades. But as I pause at the lee side of a large boulder to check my compass, I spot them, footprints shadowing mine, partially obscured by fresh snowfall. Not quite human, not quite animal. Toes too long, heel and midfoot compressed. Hysteria flutters in my chest. How is it moving so silently? Keeping pace but out of sight? I think of the face in my tent and my head swims. With a dry swallow, I push off from the boulder and quicken my steps. Perhaps I can break free from this deadly game of cat and mouse. As morning wears into afternoon with no sign of the cabin, my strength and energy flag. Despite the cold, I'm sweating beneath my layers, breath ragged, muscles burning. I can't recall the last time I stopped to eat, drink, or rest. Single-minded flight mode has consumed me. I'm skirting a ravine, using trees to anchor me on the slippery slope when I hear it. A snap of branches, a thud of something heavy landing, much closer than I whirl toward the sound, heart leaping into my throat. At the top of the steep embankment, a dark shape crouches amid the trees. Even at a distance, I can tell it's massive, well over 6 feet tall. And though it's bipedal, there is something distinctly unhuman in the cant of its broad shoulders, the elongated arms that dangle past its knees. As I stand frozen in horrified fascination, the creature unfurls from its crouch with a fluid grace that belies its size. Then it begins to lope down the incline straight toward me, moving with a rolling, rickety gait as if its joints are strangely articulated. Fight or flight instinct slams into me and I bolt, slipping and skidding over the icy ground. Behind me, the thing utters a undulating cry that sounds like a profane blending of wolf howl and human scream. I spare a glance over my shoulder and immediately wish I hadn't. It has dropped to all fours to run and is gaining fast, covering the ground with terrible speed. I catch a flash of straggly dark fur, knotted with burrs and leaves, a glimpse of pointed ears, and that demented parody of a human face. Breath sobbing, I crash wildly through the maze of trees. Branches claw at my clothing like grasping fingers. My lungs and legs burn with fatigue, but I don't dare slow down. I can hear the thing behind me, plunging through drifts and thickets, sometimes snarling, sometimes making a wheezy, panting sound almost like laughter. Just when I'm certain it's going to overtake me, that I'll feel its hot, rancid breath and rending claws on my back at any moment, I burst out of the tree line into a small clearing. And there, like a miracle, hunches a decrepit cabin, dusted with snow. Esperanza floods through me, lends wings to my exhausted feet. I race across the opening, expecting any second to be dragged down. But no blow comes. As I reach the cabin door, I risk a final look back. The creature has stopped at the edge of the clearing. It's pacing back and forth in an agitated way, head weaving from side to side. I don't wait to puzzle out its behavior. I yank open the door, hurl myself inside, and slam it shut behind me, throwing the bolt for good measure. Then I slump to the rough planks, gasping and spent. Only then, in the wan light trickling through the cracked windows, do I register what I've stumbled into. Signs of struggle, chaos, dark stains on the walls and floor that look terribly like old blood. With trembling legs, I force myself up from my slumped position against the door and take hesitant steps into the dim interior. As my eyes adjust, the scene that greets me makes my stomach heave. It's clear that I'm not the first to seek refuge in this lonely outpost, and that something terrible befell them. The single room is in shambles. Furniture overturned, shelves ripped from walls, shards of glass and ceramic littering the floor. Moldy bedding spills out of a battered cot frame in one corner. Dented pots and pans are scattered near the rust-pocked stove along with the splintered remains of chairs. But it's what decorates the walls that makes icy claws of horror sink into my guts. Ragged strips of fabric hang like pennants, flannel, Gore-Tex, cotton, emblazoned with logos for everything from bands to wilderness organizations. Crumpled wrappers from energy bars and freeze-dried meals crunch under my boots. With mounting nausea, I realize they're the tattered remnants of backpacks and jackets, clothing ripped from bodies, from other lost souls who came here just like I did, seeking shelter. Judging by the sheer amount, whatever is stalking me has been collecting trophies from its kills for a long time. My heart clenches as I think of the old trapper's dire warning, the scrap of tent caught on the riverbank. How many others have met a savage end so deep in the backcountry that they were never found? A low, keening sound slips from my lips as I confront the traces of the creature's foul habitation. In one corner, a mound of desiccated animal bones rises in a macabre pyramid. Antlers and skulls decorate the window ledges, and on crude wooden shelves, an array of strange objects have been carefully, almost reverently arranged. A rusted harmonica, a child's doll with a missing arm, a single hiking boot speckled with dark stains. The thing has been here for decades, maybe longer, collecting its grim relics of those it hunted, studying us, our tools and trinkets, learning our ways in some sick imitation of a person. My gaze falls on the one part of the cabin that appears untouched by carnage, a small desk in the corner where a scattering of tattered papers lie. My brow furrows as I step closer. They appear to be journal pages, written in a spidery, frenzied hand. The top sheet is dated May 12, 1947. With a shaking hand, I lift the first page. The opening lines make my blood congeal. It has found me again. I hear it prowling, circling my cabin night after night. I would run, but there is nowhere to go. This creature, this Wendigo, will never stop until it has consumed me, body and soul. A scuffling sound from the porch makes me freeze, the pages fluttering from my hand. Then comes a long, low scrape, as of claws dragging deliberately over wood. The thing has found me. I'm trapped in this nightmarish tomb, pinned down, with nowhere left to run. My pulse throbs in my temples as I stand motionless, scarcely daring to breathe. Floorboards creak under a ponderous weight just outside the door. A woof of breath, almost like a snuffle, as if the creature is scenting for me. I fight down a hysterical urge to laugh at that absurdity, even as my hand inches toward the knife on my belt. Another long scrape of nails over wood, an insistent pressure testing the edges of the door frame. Hinges squeal in protest, gaps appearing where the warped lumber pulls away from rusty nails. Whatever barricaded the previous occupants inside this grim tomb, it won't hold for long, not against the unholy strength of the thing that hunts me. With an oak-splitting crack, one of the boards splinters in a shower of rotted shards. I jump back, heart lodged somewhere in my throat. A gust of frigid air swirls in, carrying with it the stench of decaying flesh and an underlying musk, feral and rank. The door bulges inward, daylight spearing into the cabin's murky interior through ragged holes. Then, with a screech of rending wood, the entire panel rips free. It smashes to the floorboards in an explosion of debris, and the creature shoulders its way through the gaping maw where the door once stood. It seems to fill the small space, shaggy dark fur brushing the low rafters, arms hanging nearly to its bent knees. How could I have ever mistaken it for human, even in the flash of a glimpse through trees? This close, every detail is thrown into vivid relief, from its lumpy, elongated skull to the sharp double rows of teeth jutting from a distended jaw. The flat animal nose, the tufted pointed ears, the milky eyes recessed deep in shadowed sockets. The creature swings its massive head toward me. Its lips peel back, revealing stained gums and a slick purplish tongue that darts out to taste the air. I gag, bile climbing up my throat as the grotesque mouth opens. A string of drool stretches and snaps between blunt teeth. Rah! Grrr! The snarl contorts into a mutilated parody of human speech, vocal cords never meant for articulation straining to form the syllables. There is a glimmer of awful, alien intelligence in those pale eyes as it studies me, head cocking to one side. Fresh terror jolts through me. This creature is not simply some overgrown predator. It has awareness, a twisted semblance of understanding. And in that moment, I grasp with gut-wrenching certainty that all its stalking, its torment, has been building to this. It wants something from me, something more than meat and bone. As it shambles closer, I back away until my shoulders hit rough logs. My fingers scrabble at my belt, close around the hilt of my knife, and draw it with a soft schnick of metal. The creature's nostrils flare. I have just time to register the bunching of powerful muscles under matted fur before it lunges, one taloned hand clamping around my knife wrist and slamming it into the wall. Bones snap with a sickening crunch. Pain explodes up my arm, whiting out my vision. The knife clatters from my nerveless fingers. The stinking bulk of the creature presses against me, its other hand seizing my face in a crushing grip. I claw at the thick wrist helplessly, feet flailing as it lifts me up the wall until we are nose to snout. Ranger mine. It forces out the guttural declaration through bared fangs. Ropes of saliva dribble over my cheeks as its mouth yaws open, tongue unfurling to rasp across my face like sandpaper. The wet heat of its breath scalds my skin, and its musk clogs my nostrils. I thrash and writhe, mind shorting out on a white buzz of panic. This is how it will end, torn apart by a nightmare-made flesh. As the creature's jaws open wider, wide enough to engulf my head, a shadow in the periphery of my vision catches my attention. An antler, jutting from one of its grisly trophies on the window ledge. With my one free hand, I desperately grope for the sharp tangs. Just as the creature lunges to clamp its teeth on my skull, my fingers close on smooth bone. I jerk the antler forward and plunge it into the soft meat of the creature's throat with every ounce of my fading strength. Hot, brackish liquid spurts over my hand, a vile brew of blood and other fluids. The creature rears back with an ear-splitting shriek, shaking its shaggy head. Its hands rip away from me, scrabbling at the wound as more foul ichor pulses between its twisted fingers. I drop to the floor, legs giving out. Pain throbs in my broken wrist, but I shove to my feet, staggering toward the empty doorframe. I need to run, escape while the thing is distracted. But my body is battered, pushed past all endurance, and I crumple to my knees on the cabin's porch. Behind me, I can hear the creature's screams shift and warp. One moment it's the high, keening wail of an animal. The next a garbled string of almost words, as if it's trying to curse me in a stolen human tongue. I crawl forward through the drifted snow, each dragging shuffle in agony. Then the screaming abruptly cuts off, plunging the world into an eerie silence broken only by the rasp of my labored breathing. I freeze on hands and knees, breath pluming in the frigid air. The sudden absence of sound is almost more horrifying. A bloody handprint steams on the snow before me. Is it over? Did I actually damage the creature enough to? A low creaking growl shatters that faint hope. I twist to look behind me and my heart seizes. The creature staggers onto the porch, one taloned hand still clamped to its neck. Pale runnels streak through the dark fur on its chest. But it's still very much alive and intent on its prey. With a choking sob, I heave to my feet and lurch toward the tree line. The heavy crunch of footfalls pursues me. Despite my battered body screaming for respite, I goad myself into a shambling run. Bulling into the sheltering embrace of the forest, I risk a final glance over my shoulder. The creature has paused at the edge of the clearing, swaying slightly. It must have lost a lot of blood. Then I realize it's not just that. It appears to be changing. Even as I watch in disbelief, it buckles forward, spine realigning with a grisly popping sound. The tattered remains of clothing that cling to its frame split at the seams as bones elongate and muscles swell grotesquely. As its metamorphosis completes, it looks less like the bipedal man-thing that spoke garbled words, and more like a huge quadrupedal beast, some impossible merging of bear and wolf. With a last keening howl, it crashes into the trees after me, tearing through the brush on all fours. Any measure of rational thought abandons me. I'm reduced to pure animal instinct, and that instinct screams at me to flee. Slipping, clawing, half falling, I blunder almost blindly through the shadowed woods. Thorns catch and sting, but I barely feel them. Behind me, I can hear the thing panting as it scents after me, utterly relentless in its hunt. At last, I stumble out of the tree line onto the rocky bank of a frozen creek. Wind keens through the narrow ravine, kicking up stinging sprays of ice crystals. Even in my adrenaline-shot haze, I recognize it as the same gorge I passed yesterday. Or was it longer ago at this point? Time seems to have lost all meaning. The bang of the creature reverberates against stone as it closes on me. With the last of my strength, I force myself into a staggering run. I don't know where I'm heading, just away, across the frozen creek, up the slippery embankment. World narrowed to the ragged pull of air into my lungs, the jarring of each footfall against uneven ground. But I can't keep this up forever. Spent muscles falter, and I crash to my knees on a scree slope. The thing is so close now I can feel the drumbeat of its heavy strides through the thin soles of my boots. With one last Herculean effort, I fling myself to the bottom of a small ravine and wedge into a narrow cut between two boulders. Whimpering, I press myself as far into the tiny cleft as I can. Overhead, a shadow falls across the stone. Then the creature is there, its reeking musk filling the small space. One long arm, now more akin to a shaggy paw, reaches in to scrabble at me. Claws rake fire across my calf before I manage to jerk away. For an eternal minute we remain at this stalemate, the creature lunging and snarling, me cowering just out of reach. Then, abruptly, it backs off, goes silent and still. Despite the cramping agony in my contorted limbs, I don't dare move or make a sound. An endless stretch of quiet, broken only by the keening of wind. Hardly daring to breathe, I creep forward enough to peer out of my crevice. The creature has vanished, no trace of it save for churned-up snow and a few scarlet drops on the scree. I slump against rough stone, sucking in ragged breaths. My head swims, vision blurring at the edges. A shocky numbness is overtaking the pain and terror. I know that hypothermia and blood loss will claim me soon if I don't move. Try to find my way back to civilization and an end to this nightmare. With shaking hands, I pull out my sat phone. The screen is cracked, but it powers up. Only 1 bar and the battery is almost gone, but it will have to be enough. I switch it on and wait for the call to connect, never taking my eyes off the empty slope. Then a shadow flickers in the periphery of my graying vision. Something dark and hulking. A deeper patch of gloom creeping over stone and snow with a sinuous, predatory grace. Slowly, I raise my head. A strangled sound escapes me as I meet that milky, inhuman gaze peering down at me from the lip of the crevice. One word sighs out on a raw breath that steams in the frigid air. Please. I don't know if it's a plea for mercy or death. The creature regards me silently. For a moment, I imagine I see a glint of something close to pity in those pale, unreadable eyes. Then it draws back, melts into shadow and snow as if it had never been more than a phantasm of my unraveling mind. A crackle of static. Ranger station, what's your emergency? The world seems to rush away down a long, dark tunnel. With the last of my fading strength, I whisper a reply. It's in the woods. It's still out there. In the distance, the wind rises, keens and howls through dark pines, sounding almost like the cry of some monstrous throat. I slump back against icy stone, phone slipping from my nerveless fingers into drifting snow. As gray mist swallows my vision, I can't be certain if the shadow lurking at the edges is real or imagined. The monster, or my own demons, come to claim me at last. Awareness returns in fits and snatches. Disjointed flashes of light and motion, urgent voices garbled as if underwater. I surface to an antiseptic brightness, chemical smells, the rhythmic beeping of machines. Slowly, like an image resolving from static, a hospital room takes shape around me. You're one lucky son of a gun. A weathered face swims into view above me, parkranger patch on a faded hat. Found you half frozen up on Bent Creek Ridge, babbling about some creature in the woods. Doc says it's a miracle you didn't lose more digits to frostbite. I stare up at him, mouth working soundlessly. How can I even begin to explain? The things I saw, the journal pages, the grim trophies in that blood-spattered cabin. It was real, I rasp through a throat scoured raw. The missing hikers, the attacks, there's something out there in the dark, hunting. The ranger's lips press into a grim line. He leans closer, lowers his voice. You're not the first to come out of those woods haunted. There have been stories round these parts for generations. Something that ain't quite man or beast stalking the wild places. Folks say it's a spirit of the old forest, a wendigo. The word sends a bolt of ice down my spine. The same phrase scrawled in that yellowed journal from 1947. A chill certainty sinks deep in my marrow that the thing in the woods is far older than that, ancient and patient and insatiable in its hunger. "Rest up now," the ranger says, patting my unbandaged hand. "We'll send a team out to look for this cabin of yours once the weather clears. See if we can find any sign of your creature." He doesn't believe. I can see it in his pitying eyes. He thinks the ramblings of my traumatized mind, the hypothermia-induced hallucinations of a man pushed beyond all physical and mental endurance. I almost envy him that comforting delusion, because I know the truth that will forever haunt me, that no search party will ever find any trace of the creature's foul den or its grisly souvenirs. That thing is too canny, too clever in its malevolence to leave evidence behind, but it's still out there in the vast primordial wilderness. I feel that with every fiber of my being, watching and waiting from the shadows of ancient pines, listening for the echoes of human activity that draw it like sharks to blood in the water. Hungry, patient. I close my eyes, but it's seared there on the backs of my lids. That grotesque, not quite human face. Those pale predator's eyes that peered into mine and saw me as less than a creature like itself. As meat. As prey. The wound on my wrist throbs in time with my pulse. Jagged teeth marks that I tell the doctors were from a wolf. What else could I say? That a monster wearing the shape of a man clamped its jaws around my arm as it pinned me to a cabin wall. They've bandaged and stitched the physical wounds, but there are hurts they can't touch. Invisible scars on my psyche that I'll carry for the rest of my days, because now I know what stalks the spaces between tree and shadow, what crouches in lightless caves and shambles on twisted limbs through the trackless heart of the forest. It has many names, and none. Dogman, Wendigo, Skinwalker. And I know with grim certainty that one day I'll venture into the woods again and seek it out. Track it back to its lair and confront it on its own terms, even if it damns me. Because it looked into my eyes and saw me, knew me, claimed me as its own. I'm bound to it now, a connection forged in blood and terror. The wild places are no longer a sanctuary, but a hunting ground stalked by a nightmare made flesh. And it's calling to me in the long nights, a howl on the edge of sleep, sibilant and seductive. A summons I know I won't be able to resist forever. Because no matter how far I run, how deep I bury this memory, I'll always hear it whispering my name. My name's Lyle Grady, and this all went down in 2008 when I was stationed out in Spokane, Washington with the National Missing and Unidentified Person System, or NAMAS for short. I'd been doing this job for over a decade, and I'd seen it all, or at least I thought I had. People go missing for all sorts of reasons, and sometimes the reasons are worse than the disappearance itself. That's something they don't warn you about in training, I'll tell you that much. It was late October, and the cold was already settling into my bones each morning. The kind of cold that makes you question your life choices, especially when those choices involve trekking through dense woodland looking for people who, statistically speaking, you probably won't find alive. I'd transferred to the Spokane office after a particularly rough case in Montana that left me questioning whether I could continue in this line of work. My supervisor thought a change of scenery might help. It didn't. The office was housed in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of town, all concrete floors and exposed pipes. The kind of place that never quite warmed up, no matter how high you cranked the thermostat. My desk was littered with case files, photographs of smiling faces that may or may not still exist somewhere in the world. I'd been staring at one particular file for the past hour when Mike Donnelly, my partner of 3 months, tossed a fresh manila folder onto my desk. "Got a new one for you, Grady," he said, taking a sip from his perpetually full coffee mug. "Young woman disappeared while hiking. Local PD's been on it for weeks with nothing to show." I flipped open the folder and was greeted by the face of Sarah Mitchell. 23 years old, auburn hair, green eyes, wide smile. The kind of photo parents proudly display on mantelpieces. According to the file, she'd gone hiking in Pine Ridge Forest 3 weeks ago and never returned. Her car was found at the trailhead, packed with supplies for a day hike, water bottle, granola bars, a small first aid kit. Nothing was missing, except Sarah herself. "Any leads?" I asked, scanning through the preliminary reports. Mike shook his head. "That's why they called us in. Search and rescue combed those woods for days. Nothing. No backpack, no clothing, no blood. It's like she walked into thin air." I'd heard that phrase too many times in my career. Nobody just vanishes without a trace. There's always something left behind, some evidence of their existence. The absence of evidence is often the most troubling evidence of all. What about family, friends, boyfriend, girlfriend? All checked out. She was a graduate student at Eastern Washington University, studying environmental science. By all accounts, she was well-liked. No known enemies. Parents are divorced, but on good terms. She was close with both of them. No romantic relationship at the time of her disappearance. I continued flipping through the file, looking for anything unusual. Says here she was an experienced hiker. Yeah, that's the thing. She knew those trails, hiked them regularly according to her roommate. Always stuck to the marked paths, always told someone where she was going. So why'd she go off trail this time? Mike shrugged. That's what we need to figure out. I spent the next few days interviewing Sarah's friends, family, and professors. They all painted the same picture: responsible, cautious, not the type to take unnecessary risks. Her roommate Jen was the last person to see her. She said Sarah had mentioned wanting to photograph some rare birds that had been spotted in the area. Nothing unusual about that. Sarah was an amateur photographer with a particular interest in wildlife. She was so excited about those birds, Jen told me, her eyes reddening. Said they were only in the area for a short time during migration. She wanted to get some shots for her thesis project. Her father, a stoic man with calloused hands and a permanent furrow between his brows, showed me the last text she'd sent him. Heading to Pine Ridge. Should be back by 6. Love you. Her mother played me the last voicemail where Sarah's voice, bright and clear, talked about dinner plans for the following weekend. I visited her apartment, a small but tidy one-bedroom she shared with Jen. Her room was neat, everything in its place. A bookshelf lined with texts on ecology and environmental science, a desk with a laptop, and a row of framed photographs, landscapes mostly, a few of birds in flight. Nothing that suggested she was troubled or planning to disappear. The local police had already reviewed security footage from nearby businesses, checked her cell records, and interviewed anyone who might have seen her that day. The last confirmed sighting was at a gas station about 5 miles from the trailhead. The attendant remembered her buying a bottle of water and asking about the weather conditions up in the mountains. By the end of the week, I was ready to call it a lost cause. We'd exhausted all the usual avenues. No credit card activity since her disappearance. No cell phone pings. No sightings. People do sometimes choose to vanish, to walk away from their lives. But everything about Sarah Mitchell suggested a young woman with plans, with connections, with reasons to stay. I was sitting at my desk on Friday afternoon, staring at her smiling face, when the call came in. A local man, hiking in Pine Ridge, had found something strange near the trail where Sarah was last seen, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up when he described it. This job teaches you to trust that feeling, the one that tells you something isn't right, that you're about to step into darkness. I should have listened to it more carefully that day. I met the hiker, Alan Cooper, at the Pine Ridge trailhead early the next morning. The fog hung low over the mountains, turning the forest into something out of a Gothic painting. Cooper was waiting in his truck, a thermos of coffee clutched in trembling hands. Mid-50s, weathered face, the kind of man who'd spent most of his life outdoors. But something had shaken him. Been hiking these trails for 30 years, he said as we started the trek to the spot he'd found. Never seen anything like it. Wouldn't have even noticed if my dog hadn't started acting strange. We followed the main trail for about 2 miles before Cooper led me onto a barely visible path that branched off to the right. The undergrowth was thick here, brambles catching at our clothing as we pushed through. After another half-mile, the forest opened into a small clearing. That's where I saw it. At first glance, it looked like a random pile of rocks, the kind you might see hikers stack for fun. But as I got closer, I realized there was a deliberate pattern to it. The rocks formed a rough circle about 6 feet in diameter, with smaller stones arranged in lines radiating from the center, like a primitive sun symbol. Next to it, just as Cooper had described, was a patch of earth where the grass had been flattened in a perfect circle. "Found it 3 days ago," Cooper said, keeping his distance. "Would have called sooner, but I figured it was just kids messing around. Then I saw the news about that missing girl." I circled the formation, taking photos from various angles. Something about it triggered a memory, something I'd seen in another case years ago. I pulled out my phone and sent the images to Dr. Eleanor Reed, an anthropologist friend who specialized in regional folklore and symbols. "Any idea what this means?" Cooper asked, his voice tight. I shook my head. "Not yet, but it's definitely man-made." As I continued to examine the area, something caught my eye, a glint of reflected light in the dirt near the edge of the rock circle. I crouched down and carefully brushed away the soil, revealing a jagged piece of glass about the size of my palm. One edge was smeared with what looked like dried blood. My pulse quickened. This was the first physical evidence we'd found that might be connected to Sarah's disappearance. I carefully bagged the glass, making a mental note to have it tested for DNA. "Was this here when you found the rocks?" I asked Cooper. He frowned. "Don't think so, but I didn't look too closely." I widened my search, moving in concentric circles around the rock formation. About 20 feet away, partially hidden under a bush, I found a scrap of blue fabric. Sarah had been wearing a blue hiking jacket, according to the description in her file. Another 10 feet beyond that, a piece of frayed rope, its ends cleanly cut rather than broken. The hair on the back of my neck stood up again, that primal warning system that evolution had given us. I felt watched. The forest, which had been filled with birdsong when we arrived, had gone eerily silent. I scanned the trees surrounding the clearing but saw nothing unusual, just shadows shifting as clouds passed overhead, the occasional movement of branches in the wind. "We should keep looking," I told Cooper. "Fan out, but stay within sight of each other." We spent the next hour searching the area, finding more disturbing evidence with each passing minute. Another flattened circle of grass, this one larger than the first. More scraps of blue fabric. A single hiking boot, the same brand Sarah wore according to her roommate. And most disturbing of all, a camera memory card half buried in the soft earth. I radioed Mike, who was searching another section of the forest, and told him to meet me at the clearing. While I waited, I continued to explore, moving deeper into the woods. The terrain became rougher, the trees more densely packed. I found myself having to climb over fallen logs and navigate around thick patches of underbrush. That's when I heard it, a faint rustling sound like someone moving through the trees ahead of me. It could have been an animal, but something about the rhythm of it seemed too deliberate, too measured for a deer or raccoon. "Hello?" I called out. "This is Namas. If someone's there, identify yourself." No response, but the rustling stopped abruptly. I strained my ears, listening for any sound that might indicate where it had come from. Nothing. Just the soft whispering of wind through pine needles and the distant call of a crow. I was about to turn back when I noticed a narrow path cutting through the underbrush ahead. It wasn't a marked trail, more like a game trail that animals might use, but it seemed too wide and well-trodden for that. Something compelled me to follow it, though every instinct was screaming at me to wait for backup. The path led deeper into the forest, winding between ancient trees whose branches formed a canopy so thick that little sunlight penetrated to the forest floor. The temperature seemed to drop with each step I took, and the air grew heavier, damp with the smell of decaying vegetation and something else, something metallic and vaguely familiar that I couldn't quite place. After about half a mile, the path opened onto another clearing, smaller than the first. In the center stood what looked like an old hunting cabin, its wooden walls weathered gray by years of exposure to the elements. The windows were covered with dirt and grime, making it impossible to see inside. A single door hung slightly ajar, as if inviting me in. I approached cautiously, my hand resting on the gun at my hip. The cabin looked abandoned, but the area around it was oddly clear of debris. No fallen branches, no overgrown weeds. Someone had been maintaining it. I was still about 20 feet away when I noticed something carved into the door, another symbol similar to the rock formation we'd found but more elaborate. Before I could examine it more closely, I heard Mike's voice crackling over the radio. "Grady, where are you? I'm at the clearing with Cooper." I keyed the radio. About half a mile northwest, I found a cabin. I think someone's been using it recently. Wait there, don't go in alone. I'm on my way. I acknowledged and clicked off the radio. As I stood there, waiting, I felt it again. That sensation of being watched. I scanned the trees surrounding the clearing, but saw nothing. Then a movement caught my eye, just at the edge of my peripheral vision. I turned quickly, but whatever it was had vanished. The silence was oppressive now, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I noticed that the door to the cabin had opened wider, though I hadn't touched it. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. I should have listened to Mike. I should have waited. But curiosity, that damn professional curiosity that had gotten me into tight spots before, got the better of me. I approached the cabin, drew my weapon as a precaution, and stepped inside. What I found there would haunt my dreams for years to come. The stench hit me first, a nauseating blend of mildew, rotting wood, and that same metallic smell I'd noticed on the path, stronger now, so strong it made my eyes water. I pulled out my flashlight and swept the beam across the interior of the cabin. It was a single room, maybe 15 by 20 feet, with a small wood stove in one corner and a narrow cot against the far wall. A rickety table stood in the center, cluttered with various objects I couldn't immediately identify. But it was the walls that made my blood run cold. They were covered, floor to ceiling, with photographs. Hundreds of them, overlapping, creating a macabre wallpaper of faces. Men, women, young, old, a diverse collection of humanity. But they all shared one disturbing feature. Each person was staring directly at the camera with unmistakable terror in their eyes. I moved closer, my flashlight beam dancing across the photographs. Most were Polaroids, yellowed with age. Others looked more recent, printed on glossy photo paper. In some, the subjects appeared to be outdoors, trees or mountains visible in the background. In others, they were clearly inside this very cabin, the wood stove or table visible behind them. My heart nearly stopped when I saw her, Sarah Mitchell, her auburn hair tangled, her green eyes wide with fear. The photo had been taken in this cabin. I could see the same table in the background. She was alive, or had been, when the picture was taken. The date stamp in the corner showed it was taken just 2 weeks ago, a week after she'd disappeared. I forced myself to look away from her face and continued examining the room. The table was covered with an assortment of items that appeared to be personal effects. Watches, jewelry, wallets, cell phones. Trophies, I realized with growing horror. Souvenirs taken from the people in the photographs. In the corner opposite the wood stove was a stack of leather-bound journals, at least a dozen of them, piled haphazardly on the floor. I picked up the one on top, its binding cracked and worn with use, and opened it. The first page contained a list of names, each followed by a date and location. Most had a red X next to them, drawn in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. Others had question marks. I flipped through the pages, my stomach churning as I realized I was looking at a record of victims, a meticulous documentation of suffering. Sarah's name was there near the end of the most recent journal, next to a date 2 weeks earlier. It had a question mark beside it, not an X. What did that mean? Was she still alive somewhere? I continued searching, hoping to find something that might lead me to her. Under the cot was a metal lockbox. It was unlocked, and inside I found more photographs, these even more disturbing than the ones on the walls. I forced myself to look through them, searching for clues. The final photo in the stack made my breath catch. It showed the rock formation we'd found earlier, but the image was taken at night, with a fire burning in the center of the stone circle. Shadowy figures stood around it, their faces obscured by what appeared to be crude masks made of animal skulls. I was so absorbed in what I'd found that I almost missed the sound, the soft crunch of leaves outside the cabin. I froze, my flashlight beam fixed on the open doorway. Another crunch, closer now. Someone was approaching. I quickly shut off my flashlight and crouched behind the table, drawing my gun. Through a crack in the cabin wall, I could see a figure moving toward the door. Tall, with a hunched posture, walking with slow, deliberate steps. I couldn't make out their face in the dim light, but I could see something glinting in their hand. A long, curved knife. My heart pounded so hard I was sure it would give me away. I considered my options. I could try to apprehend the person, potentially Sarah's abductor, but I was alone, and if they had accomplices, I'd be outnumbered. I could call for backup, but the sound of my radio would reveal my position, or I could hide and hope they left without discovering me. Before I could decide, the figure reached the doorway and paused, as if sensing something amiss. I held my breath, pressing myself closer to the floor. Then, with agonizing slowness, they stepped inside. In the dim light filtering through the dirty windows, I could finally see him clearly. A man, maybe in his 50s, with a gaunt face and long, matted gray hair. He wore stained canvas pants and a heavy flannel shirt despite the warm day. But it was his eyes that chilled me to the bone. Pale blue, almost colorless, and utterly devoid of emotion. The eyes of someone who had long ago crossed a line into darkness from which there was no return. He moved through the cabin with the familiarity of someone coming home, setting his knife on the table just inches from where I hid. I could smell him now. Sweat, dirt, and that metallic scent I'd noticed earlier. Blood, I realized. The man reeked of old blood. He went straight to the stack of journals, muttering to himself in a language I didn't recognize. The words sounded ancient, guttural, like nothing I'd ever heard before. He picked up the journal I'd been looking at, and I silently cursed myself for not putting it back exactly as I'd found it. He froze, his head tilting like a predator sensing prey. Slowly he turned, those pale eyes scanning the cabin. I pressed myself harder against the floor, willing myself to be invisible. For a moment, I thought he was going to move on, to attribute the disturbance to his own forgetfulness. But then his gaze dropped to the floor, where I'd disturbed the thick layer of dust. Footprints. My footprints. His lips pulled back in a snarl, revealing teeth filed to points. He grabbed the knife from the table and moved toward my hiding place with surprising speed. I had seconds to decide what to do. I chose to run. I burst from my hiding place, knocking the table over as I lunged for the door. The man roared, a primal, animalistic sound that didn't seem possible from a human throat. I felt the knife slash past my shoulder, missing by inches, as I stumbled into the clearing. I ran blindly, crashing through underbrush, branches whipping at my face. Behind me, I could hear him pursuing, his footsteps pounding a steady rhythm that seemed impossibly fast for someone his age. I fumbled for my radio as I ran, trying to call for help, but in my panic, I dropped it. No time to go back. I kept moving, my lungs burning, my legs pumping mechanically. I tried to orient myself to figure out which direction would lead back to the main trail where Mike and Cooper might be searching for me. But in my panic, I'd lost all sense of direction. The forest seemed to close in around me, branches reaching out like skeletal hands to impede my progress. I tripped over a root and went sprawling, my face slamming into the damp earth. For a second, I lay there stunned, the taste of blood in my mouth. Then I heard him again, closer now, that same guttural muttering. I scrambled to my feet and ducked behind a massive tree trunk, trying to control my ragged breathing. Through the undergrowth, I could see him pause about 30 yards away, his head swiveling as he searched for me. He sniffed the air like an animal tracking prey, then turned precisely in my direction. Those pale eyes seemed to look right through the foliage, right into me. He smiled. It was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen. Not an expression of joy or humor, but of anticipation. The smile of a predator who knows his prey is cornered. I ran again, changing direction, hoping to throw him off. I had a vague sense that the main trail lay to the east, so I tried to keep the afternoon sun at my right shoulder as I moved. The terrain became steeper, the ground rockier. I was ascending one of the many ridges that gave the forest its name. The higher elevation gave me a momentary advantage. I could see farther, get a better sense of where I was. About half a mile ahead, I spotted a break in the trees that might indicate the main trail. I pushed toward it, ignoring the burning in my legs and the stabbing pain in my side. Behind me, the man's footsteps had faded, but I didn't dare hope I'd lost him. More likely he was circling around, trying to cut me off before I reached the trail. I increased my pace, desperation giving me a burst of speed. I was so focused on what might be behind me that I almost missed the figure that stepped out from behind a tree just ahead. I skidded to a halt, my heart in my throat, certain it was my pursuer, But it was Mike, his gun drawn, his expression a mixture of relief and alarm. "Grady, what the hell?" "No time," I gasped, grabbing his arm. "We need to move. Now." To his credit, Mike didn't question me. He'd been my partner long enough to know when a situation was critical. We ran together toward the main trail, me gasping out a fragmented explanation as we went. I told him about the cabin, the photographs, the journals, and the man with the filed teeth and the knife. "We need backup," Mike said, pulling out his radio. "And we need to find Cooper. Last I saw, he was waiting for you at the first clearing," I said, my breathing starting to even out now that I wasn't alone. Mike nodded. "He was. I left him there when I came looking for you. Told him to stay put." We reached the main trail and paused, trying to decide which way to go. The path to the trailhead lay to the left, but Cooper was waiting at the clearing to the right. "We can't leave him out here," I said, though every instinct was screaming at me to get as far from this forest as possible. Mike nodded grimly and called for backup on his radio, giving our approximate location and a brief summary of the situation. Then we turned right, moving at a cautious jog back toward the clearing where we'd found the rock formation. We were about 100 yards from the clearing when we heard the scream, a high, terrified sound that cut off abruptly, leaving the forest in eerie silence. "Cooper," Mike whispered, his face pale. We approached the clearing more cautiously now, weapons drawn. Mike went left. I went right, both of us using the trees for cover as we moved forward. When we reached the edge of the clearing, I signaled for Mike to wait while I peered around a thick pine trunk. The clearing was empty. The rock formation was still there, but there was no sign of Cooper. I was about to signal to Mike that it was clear when I noticed something at the center of the stone circle, a dark stain on the ground that hadn't been there before. Fresh blood. I was still processing this when a figure lunged from the trees on the opposite side of the clearing, the man from the cabin, his knife now wet with what I feared was Cooper's blood. He charged straight at me, moving with that same unnatural speed. Mike shouted and fired, the sound deafening in the enclosed space of the forest. The man staggered but didn't fall. He turned toward Mike, snarling, then seemed to think better of it. With one last look at me, a look that promised this wasn't over, he disappeared back into the trees. Mike ran to me. "You okay?" I nodded, though I was shaking so badly I could barely stand. "Cooper's blood," I said, gesturing to the rock circle. Mike's face hardened. "We'll find him. But first, we need to get out of here and meet the backup team." We retreated down the main trail, moving as quickly as we dared while still maintaining vigilance. Every shadow, every rustling leaf made me flinch. I kept expecting to see those pale eyes watching from the darkness between the trees. We were about halfway to the trailhead when we heard it, a rhythmic chanting coming from somewhere deep in the forest. Multiple voices, rising and falling in that same guttural language the man had been muttering in the cabin. Mike and I exchanged glances. There were more of them out there. The realization spurred us to move faster, half jogging down the trail. The chanting grew louder, then abruptly stopped, replaced by a single piercing howl that didn't sound entirely human. Then silence. So complete it was, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. When we finally stumbled out into the parking area at the trailhead, the local sheriff's department was already there, along with 2 more NAMAS agents who'd been working nearby cases. We briefed them quickly, emphasizing the need for caution and the fact that we were likely dealing with multiple suspects. As a team of 12, we returned to the forest, first to search for Cooper, then to investigate the cabin. But I knew, even as we set out, that we wouldn't find what we were looking for. The man, and whoever else was out there with him, had had plenty of time to clear out, to erase the evidence of their presence. I was right. Cooper was gone without a trace, just like Sarah Mitchell. And when we finally located the cabin again, hours later, it was empty. The photographs had been stripped from the walls, the journals and lockbox removed. Even the table had been cleared of the personal effects I'd seen earlier. The only evidence that remained was a faint bloodstain on the floor near where I'd hidden and the lingering metallic smell that now made my stomach turn. As night fell, and we were forced to suspend the search until morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that pale eyes were following our every move from the darkness of the forest. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this wasn't over. The search for Alan Cooper and Sarah Mitchell continued for weeks. We brought in dogs, helicopter surveys, thermal imaging, every resource at our disposal. The forest was combed inch by inch, focusing on the area around the cabin and expanding outward in concentric circles. We found evidence of recent activity: fire pits, makeshift shelters, more of those strange rock formations, but no sign of Cooper or Sarah. The only concrete piece of evidence we recovered was the piece of glass I'd bagged before finding the cabin. DNA testing confirmed it was stained with Sarah's blood. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those photographs wallpapering the cabin, all those terrified faces staring back at me. I saw Sarah's eyes, wide with fear. I heard Cooper's scream cutting through the forest silence, and I smelled that metallic stench that seemed to have followed me home, clinging to my clothes and skin no matter how many times I showered. The local authorities were skeptical of my account. They found the cabin, of course. It was still standing where I'd described it. But empty. It looked like nothing more than an abandoned hunting shack. Without the photographs, the journals, or any other physical evidence, my story sounded far-fetched. A man with filed teeth, ritualistic chanting in the woods. They humored me because of my position with NAMAS, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. Mike backed me up, confirming that he'd seen the man with the knife, that he'd fired at him. But even Mike hadn't seen inside the cabin, hadn't seen the photographs or journals, and with Cooper missing, there was no one else to corroborate the discovery of the rock formation and the other evidence we'd found. A week after the incident, I received a call from Dr. Eleanor Reed, the anthropologist I'd sent the photos of the rock formation to. "Lyle, I've been looking at those images you sent," she said, her voice tight with what sounded like professional excitement and personal unease. "That symbol, the way the rocks are arranged, it's very similar to markers used by certain isolated communities in the Pacific Northwest during the late 19th and early 20th centuries." "What kind of communities?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew the answer. "Cult-like groups, for lack of a better term. They practiced a blend of indigenous spirituality and European occultism, heavily focused on the concept of transformation through sacrifice." "Sacrifice," I repeated, the words sitting heavy in my stomach. "Yes, they believed that by consuming parts of their victims, they could absorb their essence, their life force. The circular arrangements you found are typically associated with ritual sites where these ceremonies were performed." I thought of the blood in the rock circle, of Cooper's abrupt scream. I thought of the man's teeth, filed to points, and the knife in his hand. I didn't want to connect these dots, but they were connecting themselves. "The strange thing," Dr. Reed continued, "is that most of these groups died out by the 1950s, or at least went underground. There hasn't been any documented activity in decades. If what you found is connected to one of these cults, it would suggest they've managed to maintain their practices in secret all this time, possibly passing them down through generations." After I hung up, I sat at my desk staring at the wall for a long time. The implications of what Dr. Reed had told me were too horrific to contemplate fully, but they aligned with everything I'd seen. The ritualistic elements, the trophies kept in the cabin, the coordination of multiple individuals in the forest. The investigation continued, but without concrete leads, it gradually lost momentum. The local media, which had initially been intensely interested in Sarah's disappearance and the subsequent search, moved on to other stories. The sheriff's department, stretched thin by other cases, assigned fewer deputies to the search each week. But I couldn't let it go. In my off hours, I researched the cults Dr. Reed had mentioned, piecing together their history and practices from academic papers and old newspaper accounts. I visited local historical societies, looking for any records of unusual activity in the Pine Ridge area over the decades. What I found was disturbing. Every few years, stretching back to the early 1900s, there were reports of hikers or campers disappearing in those woods. Most were written off as accidents, people getting lost, falling from ridges, being attacked by wildlife. But the pattern was there if you knew to look for it, and there were other accounts, harder to verify but no less chilling. Stories of strange lights seen in the forest at night, of eerie chanting carried on the wind, of hikers finding mutilated animal carcasses arranged in circular patterns. The locals had a name for the presence they sensed in the woods: the Watcher, a malevolent entity that stalked the forest, taking those who ventured too far from the marked trails. 2 months after our encounter in the woods, I received a package at the NAMAS office. No return address, postmarked from a town about 50 miles from Spokane. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph. Alan Cooper, his eyes wide with terror, the cabin wall visible behind him. Written on the white border at the bottom was a message in cramped, spidery handwriting, "You're next, Grady." I turned the photograph over to the FBI, who added it to the growing file on what they were now treating as a serial abduction case. They increased patrols in the area, set up cameras at trailheads throughout the region, and circulated a sketch of the man I'd seen. But deep down, I knew they wouldn't find him. Not unless he wanted to be found. I requested a transfer out of Spokane shortly after that. My supervisors, noting the toll the case had taken on me, approved it without question. I moved to the Minneapolis office, where the forests were different, more open, less secretive, but I kept tabs on the Pine Ridge case. Every few months I'd call former colleagues, check for any updates. There were none, at least not officially. But there were rumors, more disappearances, though none that could be definitively linked to our case. More sightings of strange lights and rituals deep in the woods, always dismissed as the overactive imaginations of campers. 5 years later, long after I'd moved on to other cases, other missing persons, I received another package. This one contained a page torn from one of the journals I'd seen in the cabin. On it, a list of names, all with red X's beside them: Sarah Mitchell, Alan Cooper. And at the bottom, my own name, followed by a question mark. I reported it, of course. Added it to the file. Increased security at my home. But I knew it was just a reminder. A message letting me know that I hadn't been forgotten. That somewhere in those dark woods, the Watcher was still there, still waiting. To this day, the cases of Sarah Mitchell and Alan Cooper remain unsolved. The man with the filed teeth and the knife was never identified. The cabin in the woods, when I last checked, still stands empty, a silent sentinel holding secrets I only glimpsed. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and dark, I catch a whiff of that metallic smell, just for an instant. And I know he's out there somewhere, marking his territory, waiting for the next person to stumble into his twisted little world. Waiting, perhaps, for me. And I know that if I ever return to those woods, if I ever see those pale, emotionless eyes again, I won't be coming back. My name will get that red X, another trophy on the wall. Another face frozen in terror, staring out from a Polaroid in that cabin of horrors. So I stay away from forests now. I stick to cities, to places with light and noise and people. But sometimes when I look out my window at night, I can't shake the feeling that somewhere in the darkness, someone is watching, waiting. And I wonder how long it will be before the question mark beside my name becomes an X. The morning fog hung thick between the ancient pines as I made my way along the narrow trail that led to my new cabin. My boots crunched on the mixture of pine needles and gravel, each step carrying me deeper into what would become my home for the next year. Maple Lake Wilderness Area, over 200,000 acres of pristine forest in the Pacific Northwest, untamed and largely unexplored. My name is Kai Stonewood, though most people just call me Kai. I'd taken the park ranger position at Maple Lake after spending years working behind a desk in Seattle. The isolation didn't bother me. In fact, it was exactly what I wanted. After my sister's disappearance 3 years ago during her own hiking trip in these very woods, I'd developed an obsession with wilderness search and rescue. When I saw the job posting for a ranger position at the same park where she vanished, I knew it was my chance to find answers. The interview had gone surprisingly well. The head ranger, a weathered man named Bernard, who looked like he'd been carved from the same wood as the forest, had given me a curious look when I mentioned my sister. "You know what they say about these woods," he'd said, his voice low. "They don't always give back what they take." I'd heard the rumors, of course. Every forest has its folklore. Tales of strange creatures, unexplained disappearances, and sounds that can't be attributed to any known wildlife. I dismissed them as the usual superstitions that surround remote areas. Besides, I needed this job for my own reasons. The cabin came into view as I rounded a bend in the trail. It wasn't much. A simple one-bedroom structure with a small kitchen, living area, and bathroom. Solar panels on the roof provided limited electricity and a well-supplied fresh water. My nearest neighbor would be 5 miles away, another ranger named Lena who maintained the eastern section of the wilderness area. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The interior smelled of pine and dust. Clearly, no one had been here for some time. I set down my backpack and walked to the window, looking out at the dense forest that surrounded the clearing. Somewhere out there, my sister had vanished without a trace. The official report said she'd likely fallen from one of the numerous cliffs in the area. Her body never recovered, but I wasn't convinced. Over the next few hours, I unpacked my belongings and familiarized myself with the cabin. There was a radio system for emergencies and a satellite phone for when the radio failed. The walls were adorned with maps of the area, topographical charts showing the lake, the mountains that surrounded it, and the network of trails that crisscrossed the wilderness. As evening approached, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun sink below the tree line. The chorus of forest sounds grew louder: crickets, frogs from the nearby creek, and the occasional hoot of an owl. But then, as darkness fell completely, I heard something else. A long, low call that echoed through the trees, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It wasn't quite a howl, nor was it a scream. Something in between, with an almost human quality to it. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I set my coffee down and stood peering into the darkness. Nothing moved in the tree line. The call came again, from a different direction this time, farther away. Whatever had made that sound was moving. My training told me it was probably a cougar or perhaps a wolf, though wolves were rare in this part of the forest. Yet something about that cry seemed intelligent, deliberate, as if it were not just an animal's call, but a message. That night I slept fitfully, dreams filled with shadowy figures moving between trees and my sister's voice calling out to me from somewhere deep in the woods. The next morning, I reported for my first day of duty. Bernard met me at the main ranger station, a rustic building that served as our headquarters. "Sleep well?" he asked, a knowing look in his eyes. "Heard some strange noises," I admitted. "Some kind of animal call I couldn't identify." Bernard nodded slowly. "These woods have their own language. You'll learn it in time." He handed me a worn, leather-bound notebook. "This belonged to the ranger before you, Travis. He left rather suddenly 6 months ago. Might be helpful for you to read his notes." I took the notebook, curiously flipping through pages filled with observations about wildlife, weather patterns, and trail conditions. But toward the end, the neat handwriting became increasingly erratic, the entries more disturbing. Travis had begun documenting sightings of something large moving through the trees at night. He'd found massive footprints near the lake that didn't match any known wildlife, and he'd heard the same calls I had. His final entry simply read, "It's watching the cabin, every night now. Getting closer. I can't stay here anymore." I looked up at Bernard, who was watching me carefully. "What happened to Travis?" I asked. "Officially, he resigned for personal reasons. Unofficially," Bernard shrugged. "He came running into my office one morning, pale as a ghost, rambling about something stalking him. Said he wouldn't spend another night in those woods. Packed up and left that same day." "And you didn't investigate?" "We did. Found nothing conclusive. Some unusual tracks, but nothing that couldn't be explained by known wildlife." Bernard's expression grew serious. "Listen, Kai. Every ranger who's worked that cabin has stories. Most dismiss them as imagination, the mind playing tricks in the isolation. But," he hesitated, "just keep your wits about you out there." My first few weeks passed uneventfully. I patrolled my assigned areas, checked trail conditions, and assisted the occasional lost hiker. I began to think that Travis had simply succumbed to the isolation, his mind conjuring threats where none existed. Then came the night of the first storm. Rain pounded against the cabin roof as thunder cracked overhead. I sat at my small desk, reviewing maps of areas I hadn't yet fully explored, when the lights flickered and went out. The solar battery had failed, not unusual during heavy storms. I lit a lantern and was about to radio in the power failure when I heard it, heavy footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate steps that made the wooden boards creak under significant weight. "Hello?" I called out, reaching for my flashlight. "Is someone there?" No answer, but the footsteps continued, now moving around the perimeter of the cabin. I grabbed my radio. Bernard, this is Kai at Maple Lake Cabin. I have a possible intruder. Over. Static was the only response, the storm interfering with the signal. The footsteps stopped at my bedroom window. I heard a deep, raspy breathing. Then, a scratching sound against the glass. Clutching my flashlight like a weapon, I moved toward the window. The beam of light cut through the darkness outside, illuminating sheets of rain. But nothing else. The scratching had stopped. Then came the call again. That same eerie sound I'd heard my first night. Only now it was directly outside my cabin, so loud it seemed to vibrate through the walls. It held for several seconds before fading into the night. I didn't sleep at all that night. When morning came, I searched the area around the cabin. The rain had washed away any tracks, but on my bedroom window, I found long scratches in the wood of the frame, scratches that hadn't been there before. That evening, I had visitors. A battered pickup truck rumbled down the access road, bringing Lena, the Eastern Sector Ranger, and her friend Jake, who was visiting from Australia. They'd come to check on me after my failed radio call during the storm. Lena was in her early 40s, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and the weathered look of someone who'd spent most of her life outdoors. Jake was younger, maybe mid-30s, with sun-bleached hair and the relaxed demeanor I'd come to associate with Australians. First big storm's always the worst, Lena said as we sat around my small kitchen table, mugs of hot coffee warming our hands. How are you settling in otherwise? I hesitated, then decided to be honest. I've been hearing things, strange calls at night, and during the storm, something was outside my cabin. Jake and Lena exchanged a look. What? I asked. You're not the first, Jake said. I worked as a guide in the outback for years. Heard stories from the Aboriginal trackers about the Yowie, Australia's version of what you Americans call Bigfoot. You think I heard Bigfoot? I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. I think these forests hold secrets, Lena said carefully. Things that don't fit neatly into our understanding of the world. Have you seen anything? I asked her. Not directly, but I've found tracks, heard the calls. Found trees broken in ways no known animal could manage. She sipped her coffee. Most rangers who stay long enough have some encounter they can't explain. We just don't talk about it much. No one wants to be labeled the crazy forest person. What about my sister? I asked suddenly. Jennifer Stonewood. She disappeared in this area 3 years ago. Lena's expression softened. I remember. I was part of the search team. We never found any trace of her. Could it have been whatever's out there? I don't know, Kai. There are natural dangers in these woods, cliffs, rapids, disorientation, but she set down her mug. There are other cases. Hikers who vanished without a trace, leaving behind their equipment. People found miles from where they should have been, with no memory of how they got there. A friend of mine in Canada has similar stories, Jake added. He works for their park service up north, says the indigenous rangers won't go into certain areas alone because of what they call the tall ones. I thought about the notebook Bernard had given me, Travis's increasingly panicked entries. Why doesn't anyone investigate this properly? If there's something dangerous in these woods. On what grounds? Lena interrupted gently. Reports of strange noises? Folklore? Without concrete evidence, it remains just that. Stories. After they left, I sat on my porch despite the lingering rain, thinking about what they'd said. I'd taken this job to find answers about my sister, not to chase myths. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that the two might be connected. That night, I dreamed of Jennifer. She was standing at the edge of the forest trying to tell me something, but her voice was drowned out by that same haunting call that echoed through the trees. When I woke, sweating and disoriented, I was certain of one thing. Whatever secrets these woods held, I was going to uncover them, no matter the cost. I just didn't realize how high that cost would be. The first sign that something was truly wrong came about a month after I'd settled into my role at Maple Lake. I was on a routine patrol of the northern trails, documenting washouts that needed repair after the recent rains, when I noticed the silence. Forests are never truly quiet. There's always the rustle of leaves, bird song, the scurrying of small creatures. But as I climbed higher along the ridge trail, all sound gradually faded until I stood in complete, unnatural silence. I stopped, muscles tensing as I scanned the trees around me. Nothing moved. No birds flew overhead. Even the ever-present whisper of wind through branches had ceased, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. That's when I saw it. A dark figure standing motionless among the trees about 50 yards ahead. Tall, much taller than any human, and broad-shouldered, its form partially obscured by the trunk of a massive pine. I couldn't make out any details, just a silhouette that seemed to absorb the light around it. "Hello," I called out, immediately regretting breaking the silence. My voice sounded small and vulnerable in the still air. "This is Ranger Stonewood. Identify yourself." The figure didn't move or respond. I reached for my radio, but before I could call in, the silence was shattered by the crack of breaking branches. The figure moved with startling speed, not toward me but deeper into the forest, covering ground with long, fluid strides that no human could match. I stood frozen, heart hammering against my ribs, as the normal sounds of the forest gradually returned around me, almost apologetically, as if the wildlife were embarrassed by their momentary desertion. When I reported the incident to Bernard at our weekly check-in, his expression remained carefully neutral, but I noticed his knuckles whitening as he gripped his coffee mug. "Probably a bear," he suggested, not meeting my eyes. "They can stand on their hind legs, look bigger than they are." "This wasn't a bear," I insisted. "It moved like nothing I've ever seen." Bernard sighed, finally looking at me directly. "What do you want me to say, Kai? That you saw Bigfoot? That there's some undiscovered primate living in woods that have been mapped and studied for over a century? I want you to acknowledge that something strange is happening here. Travis wasn't crazy, was he? Travis was a good ranger who spent too much time alone," Bernard said firmly. "Look, I've been working these woods for 25 years. I've heard all the stories, seen things myself I can't explain, but we stick to what we can verify. That's our job. And when a hiker goes missing, like my sister, is that just another thing we can't verify?" Bernard's expression softened. "I know why you're here, Kai, and I respect it. But chasing shadows in the woods won't bring you closure." But I wasn't looking for closure. I was looking for the truth. That evening, I had another visitor. A truck I didn't recognize pulled up to my cabin just as dusk was settling over the forest. A man stepped out, tall, with silver hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and deep creases around eyes that had seen too much sun. He introduced himself as Makwa, a member of the indigenous tribe whose ancestral lands included parts of the wilderness area. "Bernard said you've been asking questions," he said as he accepted the coffee I offered. "About the woods, about what lives here." "You know something?" I asked, trying to contain my eagerness. Makwa smiled slightly. "I know what my grandfather taught me, and what his grandfather taught him. The name we have for it translates roughly to the tall one who walks alone. But your culture calls it Sasquatch or Bigfoot." "You believe it's real?" I asked. "It's not a question of belief for my people. It's knowledge." He looked out the window at the darkening forest. "They aren't animals, not as you understand them. They're guardians in a way, protectors of the wild places. Usually they avoid humans, but sometimes, when people venture too deep, stay too long." He trailed off. "What about people who disappear in the woods?" I asked, thinking of Jennifer. Makwa's expression grew grave. "There are stories of people being taken. Some say the tall ones are curious about us. Others say they only take those who disrespect the forest or threaten its balance." He studied me. "Your sister, she was one who disappeared." I nodded. "And you came here to find her, or at least to understand what happened to her." Makwa was silent for a long moment. "The forest keeps its secrets well. But—" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, polished stone with a hole through its center. "This is a seeing stone, an old tradition. Look through it at twilight, they say, and you might glimpse things otherwise hidden." I accepted the stone, feeling somewhat foolish. "Thank you, but I'm more interested in concrete evidence, tracks, hair samples, anything that could be scientifically verified." "Science has its place," Makwa acknowledged, "but some truths lie beyond its reach." He stood to leave. "Be careful, Ranger Stonewood. The tall ones have been more active lately, more agitated. Something has disturbed their peace." After he left, I turned the stone over in my fingers, tempted to dismiss it as superstition. Yet the encounter with the dark figure in the forest had shaken my certainty. What if there were things in these woods that defied conventional explanation? The following weeks brought more unsettling events. Hikers reported hearing strange calls at night. A group of campers abandoned their site after something large and upright circled their tents for hours, and I continued to find evidence around my cabin, branches broken at heights impossible for known wildlife, tufts of dark hair caught on bark that didn't match any cataloged species, and once, a clear footprint in mud near the creek. Enormous, humanoid, but with qualities no human foot possessed. I began documenting everything meticulously, collecting samples where I could. I didn't share my findings with Bernard, who I suspected would insist I stop pursuing this line of inquiry. Instead, I reached out to Lena, who seemed more open to possibilities beyond the official narrative. She arrived one evening with Jake in tow. "I brought reinforcements," she explained. "Jake has experience tracking in the Australian outback. Thought he might see something we've missed." Jake examined the footprint casts I'd made and the hair samples I'd collected. "Reminds me of what they find in Australia," he said, voice low with respect. "Different, but similar enough to be related, maybe. Different branches of the same evolutionary tree. You think there's a species of undiscovered primate living in forests around the world?" I asked. "I think there's a lot we don't know," Jake replied simply. "The world is bigger and stranger than we like to admit." Lena had been quiet, examining my wall of evidence, photos, maps marked with sighting locations, journal entries. "You're conducting a proper investigation," she observed, "not just chasing myths." "I need to know what happened to Jennifer," I said, "and I think whatever is in these woods might have the answer." "You need to be careful," she warned. "If there is something out there, something intelligent, it might not appreciate being hunted." Her words proved prophetic. That very night after they'd left, the encounters escalated. It began with the now familiar calls, closer than ever before. Then came the rocks, small at first, then larger, thumping against the roof and walls of my cabin. I shut off all lights and watched through the window as shadows moved at the edge of the clearing, just beyond where my eyes could make out details. I fumbled for the seeing stone Makwa had given me, feeling ridiculous even as I held it to my eye. Through its hole, the darkness seemed to shift and coalesce. What had been vague shadows now appeared as distinct forms, tall, powerful figures moving with purpose at the forest's edge. I could make out limbs, torsos, even the vague suggestion of faces. Not human, but not entirely animal either. They were communicating somehow, gesturing to each other in what appeared to be a deliberate language, and they were focused entirely on my cabin, on me. I dropped the stone as if it had burned me, and the figures reverted to indistinct shadows. The stone couldn't have actually enhanced my vision. It must have been suggestion, my mind filling in details I expected to see. Yet the fear that gripped me was very real. I spent the night huddled in the center of the cabin, my back against the wall, clutching my flashlight and radio. By morning, the forest had returned to normal, birds singing as if nothing had happened. But around my cabin lay evidence of the night's events. Rocks that had been thrown, branches arranged in patterns too deliberate to be coincidental, and a clear message scrawled in the dirt of my garden, deep gouges forming letters, "Go away." It could have been a hoax, of course, local teenagers playing pranks on the new ranger. But in my heart, I knew better. Something in these woods was intelligent enough to communicate, and it wanted me gone. I thought about leaving. Any reasonable person would have. But then I found Jennifer's compass. It was half buried near the creek, about a mile from my cabin. Tarnished and weathered, but unmistakable, the custom compass I'd given her for her 25th birthday, her initials still visible on the back. It shouldn't have been there. The search teams had combed this area extensively after her disappearance. Yet here it was, placed where I would find it during my regular patrol. Not lost, but deliberately positioned. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. If the entities in the woods were trying to communicate, perhaps it was time I answered. The compass changed everything. If it had been there all along, how had search parties missed it? And if it hadn't, if it had been placed there recently, then by whom, or what? Either way, it was the first tangible connection to Jennifer I'd found since arriving at Maple Lake. I debated reporting the find to Bernard, but something held me back. The compass felt like a message meant specifically for me. Besides, I wasn't sure I trusted the official channels anymore. Too many strange occurrences had been dismissed, too many questions left unanswered. That evening I made preparations. If the entities in the forest, whatever they were, had made a gesture of communication, I would respond in kind. I gathered supplies for an overnight stay in the woods, camping gear, extra clothing, my camera, and several items belonging to Jennifer that I'd brought with me. Her favorite scarf, a photo of us together, and now, her compass. I chose a small clearing about half a mile from my cabin, visible from the trail but surrounded by dense forest. I set up a simple camp, a tent, a small fire ring, though I decided against actually lighting a fire, and a perimeter of battery-operated lanterns. Then I arranged Jennifer's belongings carefully on a flat rock like offerings. The sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples before the darkness closed in. As night fell completely, I sat cross-legged near Jennifer's things, waiting. The forest grew quiet in that unnatural way I'd experienced before, the prelude to their arrival. "I know you're out there," I said aloud, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I know you've been watching me. I'm not here to harm you or expose you. I just want to understand, and I want to know what happened to my sister." Nothing but silence answered me. "Her name was Jennifer," I continued, touching her scarf. "She disappeared in these woods 3 years ago. This was hers. So was this compass that I found by the creek. Did you know her? Did you take her?" The crack of a branch breaking in the darkness made me flinch, then another. Something large was moving around the perimeter of my camp, just beyond the reach of my lanterns. I fought the urge to retreat to my tent or flee back to the cabin. This was what I'd come for. "Please," I said, forcing my voice to remain calm. "I need to know." A low, rumbling vocalization drifted from the darkness. Not the eerie call I'd heard before, but something more deliberate, almost like speech, but in no language I recognized. It was answered by another voice from a different direction. I was surrounded. Slowly, I reached for Makwa's seeing stone, which I'd brought along more out of respect for his gift than any belief in its powers. Holding it to my eye, I peered into the darkness. Through the stone's hole, the shadows took form again. I could make out 3 figures positioned around my camp, massive and upright. They were covered in dark hair, with broad shoulders and long, powerful limbs. Their faces were partially hidden, but I caught glimpses of deep-set eyes watching me with unmistakable intelligence. One seemed to notice my observation, tilting its head in a curious gesture. It took a deliberate step forward, then another, entering the edge of my lantern light. I lowered the stone, half expecting the figure to vanish like a mirage, but it remained, now visible even without the stone's aid. Standing at least 8 feet tall, its body covered in dark brown hair, it regarded me with eyes that reflected the lantern light. Not animal eyes. There was awareness there, calculation, perhaps even emotion. Fear kept me frozen in place as the being approached. It stopped a few yards away, then crouched down to bring itself closer to my level. A gesture of reassurance. The creature reached out one massive hand toward Jennifer's compass, hesitating as if asking permission. "It was my sister's," I managed to say. The being made a sound, a soft, almost mournful vocalization, then pointed to the forest behind it. It repeated the gesture, clearly trying to communicate something. "Jennifer, do you know where she is?" The creature stood again, stepped back, and made a beckoning motion. It wanted me to follow. Every survival instinct screamed against the idea of following this enormous, unknown being into the dark forest. Yet I had come seeking answers, and now they were being offered. If there was any chance of learning what happened to Jennifer, "I'll come," I said, gathering Jennifer's belongings and my backpack. "But I need to be able to find my way back." The creature waited as I collected a lantern. Then it turned and moved into the forest with surprising grace for its size. I followed, my light casting bizarre shadows among the trees. We traveled deeper into the wilderness than I had ever ventured before, the terrain growing increasingly rough. The creature moved with confidence, occasionally looking back to ensure I was still following. Two others flanked us at a distance, visible only as moving shadows. After what seemed like hours, we arrived at the base of a cliff face I didn't recognize from any of my maps. The rock wall was split by a narrow crevice, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. My guide ducked inside, and after a moment's hesitation, I followed. The crevice opened into a cave system, a large main chamber with tunnels branching off in several directions. The space smelled of earth and something musky I couldn't identify. Scattered around were objects I instantly recognized as human-made. A hiking boot, a tattered backpack, a camera, a water bottle. Items that had been collected or taken. The creature moved to one corner of the cave and crouched beside what looked like a carefully arranged pile of objects. It gestured for me to approach. My lantern light fell upon a makeshift shelter of sorts. Branches woven together to form a crude dome, lined with what appeared to be clothing and fabric. And inside, arranged with what could only be described as care, were Jennifer's belongings, her backpack, her hiking boots, her jacket. Everything except the compass I now held in my trembling hand. "She was here?" I whispered, voice breaking. "Was she... is she..." The creature made a series of vocalizations, gesturing first to the shelter, then to the deeper tunnels, then upward. Without language, I couldn't understand what it was trying to tell me. Then it did something unexpected. It reached out and gently took the photo I was carrying, the one of Jennifer and me together. It studied it carefully, then pointed to me in the image, then to me physically. Next, it pointed to Jennifer in the photo, then toward one of the tunnels. My heart nearly stopped. "She's alive? She's here?" The creature made another sound, softer this time, and turned toward the tunnel it had indicated. It looked back at me, clearly wanting me to follow. I should have been terrified. I should have been looking for an escape. Instead, I followed, hope and dread warring within me as we moved deeper into the earth. The tunnel widened into another chamber, this one illuminated by a shaft of moonlight from a small opening in the ceiling, and there, huddled against the far wall, was a human figure. "Jennifer," I called, my voice echoing. The figure stirred, lifting its head. Long, matted hair fell away from a face I hadn't seen in 3 years, thinner now, weathered, but unmistakably my sister's. "Kai?" Her voice was hoarse from disuse. "Is that really you?" I rushed forward, falling to my knees beside her. "Jennifer, oh my God, you're alive." She felt fragile in my arms, but she was warm, breathing, real. I pulled back to look at her. She was dressed in a strange assortment of clothing, some her own, some clearly salvaged from other sources. Her once short hair now reached past her shoulders, and her skin was deeply tanned. But her eyes, they were different, wider somehow, more alert, with an almost feral quality. How are you here? What happened to you?" I asked, overwhelmed. Jennifer looked past me to the creature standing at the chamber entrance. "They found me," she said simply. "I was injured, lost, would have died. They brought me here, healed me. You've been living with them for 3 years. Why didn't you try to get back? Everyone thought you were dead." Her expression grew distant. "At first I couldn't. My leg was broken badly. By the time I could walk, winter had set in, and then..." She looked again at the creature. "I began to understand them, to learn from them. They're not what people think, Kai. They're ancient, intelligent. The things they know about the forest, about living in harmony with it." I struggled to comprehend what she was saying. "But you could have come back later. Let people know you were alive. Would they have believed me? About them?" She shook her head. "The world would have hunted them down, turned them into specimens, destroyed their way of life. I couldn't be responsible for that. So you chose them over your own family? Over me? I've been searching for you for 3 years." The creature at the entrance made a sound, and Jennifer responded with a similar vocalization. They were communicating. "What did it say?" I asked, unsettled by this exchange. "He," Jennifer corrected gently. "His name doesn't translate, but he's what you might call an elder. He says they've been watching you since you arrived. They know why you came. That's why they led you to the compass, to prepare you." "Prepare me for what?" Jennifer took my hands in hers. "For a choice, Kai, the same one I made. You can go back to your world with knowledge that would change everything, proof of their existence. Or you can protect their secret. She paused. Or there's a third option. Which is, you could stay, learn their ways as I have, become a bridge between our worlds. I stared at her, unable to process the magnitude of what she was suggesting. Jen, you can't be serious. You want me to just disappear like you did? Let everyone think I'm dead too? It's not a small thing to ask, I know. But once you understand them, once you see what they are. She looked at the creature, the elder, with an expression of reverence. They're the original protectors of these lands, long before humans came. They have knowledge we've lost or never had. But what about your life, your friends, your career? That life feels like a dream now. This is my reality. She gestured around her. I'm not a captive, Kai. I chose this, and I'm offering you the chance to understand why. The elder made another sound and Jennifer nodded. He says you need time to think. You can stay until morning. Then you must decide, return to your world and keep their secret, or join us. And if I choose to expose them? Jennifer's expression grew sad. Then they'll relocate. They've done it before when humans grew too close. But it would mean I'd go with them. You'd never see me again. The elder retreated from the chamber, leaving Jennifer and me alone. We talked through the night, her telling me about the past 3 years, the things she'd learned, the community of these beings that lived secretly throughout the wilderness. I told her about my search for her, how I'd never given up hope. As dawn approached, illuminating the chamber through the ceiling opening, I still hadn't made my decision. Jennifer had fallen asleep, exhausted from our long conversation. I watched her sleep, trying to reconcile the sister I'd lost with this wild-eyed woman who spoke the language of creatures most people believed were mere legend. The elder returned, regarding me with those intelligent eyes. He held out something, a small leather pouch. Inside was a collection of teeth, human teeth. What is this? I asked, unnerved. Jennifer stirred, looked at the pouch, and spoke. It's a gesture of trust. They collect objects from those who don't survive the forest, not as trophies, but as memories. The teeth belong to a hiker who died in a fall last winter. They couldn't save him, but they honor his memory. The elder made a series of sounds, which Jennifer translated. He says the forest takes some and spares others. It's not their doing, it's the nature of wilderness. They try to help when they can, but they can't interfere with the forest's will. I thought about all the missing persons cases from these woods, the unexplained disappearances. How many had actually encountered these beings? How many had been helped, like Jennifer? How many had not survived, despite their intervention? As the morning light grew stronger, I knew I had to make my decision. Return to the known world with an impossible secret to keep, or step into a life I barely understood, leaving behind everything familiar. In that moment, staring into my sister's eyes and seeing her silent plea, I understood the true nature of the choice before me, and the consequences it would carry, no matter what I decided. The trek back to my cabin was surreal. Jennifer walked beside me, moving through the forest with a confidence I'd never seen in her before. The creatures, the hidden ones, as she called them, had escorted us to the edge of their territory before melting back into the trees with silent grace. I had made my decision, though it weighed on me like a stone. I would return to my role as ranger, keeping their secret, for now. Jennifer would remain with them but promised to meet me regularly at designated locations. It was a compromise that satisfied neither of us completely, but it gave me time to process everything I'd learned while maintaining contact with my sister. They've been here for thousands of years, Jennifer explained as we navigated a steep slope. Long before humans settled these lands, the local indigenous people knew of them, respected them, kept their distance. And no one's ever captured proof in all that time? I asked skeptically. Think about it, Kai. How many Bigfoot photos and videos exist? Hundreds, maybe thousands. But they're always dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications. The hidden ones understand cameras, phones. They know when they're being observed. They're intelligent, more than you can imagine. I thought about my own encounters, how they had gradually escalated from distant observations to direct contact. They were testing me, I realized, watching how I'd react. Jennifer nodded. They're cautious by nature. Survival depends on secrecy. We reached my cabin by mid-afternoon. It felt strange seeing Jennifer in this setting, my sister, presumed dead for 3 years, standing on my porch as if she'd just dropped by for a visit. She wouldn't come inside, preferring to remain in the open air. What happens now? I asked. I can't just let everyone continue thinking you're dead when I know the truth. She sighed, gazing back toward the forest. I'm not ready to return, Kai. Maybe I never will be. The life I have with them, it's different, but it's mine. I've found purpose there. As what? Some kind of ambassador? In a way. I'm learning their language, their customs. They're teaching me things about the forest that humans have forgotten, or never knew. She twisted a strand of her long hair. They're dying out, Kai. Their numbers dwindle with each generation as their habitat shrinks. They need advocates who understand both worlds. The implications of what she was describing were enormous. An intelligent, non-human species living secretly alongside us, with their own culture, language, and knowledge. If confirmed, it would rewrite our understanding of evolution, of human uniqueness, of our place in the natural world. Yet I also understood the dangers such knowledge would bring. Exploitation, capture, scientific dissection, habitat destruction. Humans didn't have the best track record when it came to encountering new species. I'll keep your secret, I promised. For now. But we need a way to communicate, to meet regularly. I need to know you're safe. Jennifer agreed. She would leave markers, specific arrangements of sticks and stones, to signal when and where we could meet. Our meetings would have to be infrequent and carefully planned to avoid detection by other rangers or hikers. As she prepared to leave, she handed me something, a necklace made of leather cords strung with smooth river stones and what looked like carved wood. Wear this, she said. It marks you as a friend. They'll be watching you, but they won't interfere with your work as long as you respect their boundaries. I put it on, feeling the weight of the stones against my chest. Which boundaries? You'll know, she said cryptically. They'll show you. With that, she embraced me one last time and disappeared into the forest with a speed and agility that spoke of her years living wild. I watched until she vanished completely, then went inside my cabin, trying to process everything that had happened. That evening, I sat on my porch watching the sunset, the necklace Jennifer had given me hanging around my neck. My world had been turned upside down, yet everything around me looked the same. The trees still swayed in the breeze, birds still called to each other, the sun still set in a blaze of color. But now I knew what watched from those woods, and the knowledge changed everything. My radio crackled to life, startling me. Ranger Stonewood, come in. This is Bernard. Over. I composed myself before responding. This is Stonewood. Go ahead. Over. Just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a couple days. Everything all right out there? Over. I hesitated. What could I possibly say? That my sister, missing and presumed dead for 3 years, had been living with a community of Bigfoot? That I'd been to their dwelling and back? All good, I replied instead. Been exploring some of the more remote trails. Signal spotty out there. Over. Roger that. Listen, we've got some university researchers coming in next week. Wildlife biologists studying predator populations. They'll be setting up camera traps in your sector. Just giving you a heads up. Over. Camera traps. In the territory of creatures desperately avoiding detection. My stomach dropped. Understood. Which areas specifically? Over. They're interested in the ridge above Maple Lake and the valley to the north. You'll need to help them access those areas. They've got permits for a 2-week study. Over. The ridge above Maple Lake, exactly where I'd followed the elder to find Jennifer, where the Hidden One's territory began. Copy that. When do they arrive? Over. Monday morning, 0800 hours at main headquarters. You'll escort them from there. Over. Will do. Stonewood out. I set the radio down, my mind racing. Camera traps designed to capture images of predators would certainly capture the hidden ones if they moved through those areas. And according to Jennifer, they did, regularly. Their main settlement might be deeper in the wilderness, but they ranged throughout the forest. I needed to warn them, but I had no way to contact Jennifer until she chose to leave me a signal. By Monday, it might be too late, unless I ventured back into their territory myself. The decision made, I gathered supplies for an overnight journey and set out immediately. The sun was already low, giving me perhaps an hour of daylight to cover as much ground as possible before darkness fell. I followed the route the elder had shown me, moving as quickly as I dared through increasingly unfamiliar terrain. Darkness caught me still a mile or more from where I estimated the cave system to be. I pressed on using my flashlight, aware that I was likely being observed already. I touched the necklace Jennifer had given me, hoping it would indeed mark me as a friend and not an intruder. A sound stopped me in my tracks, the snap of a branch, deliberate and close. My flashlight beam caught movement to my right. One of the hidden ones stood there watching me. Not the elder, but a younger individual, more slender in build. "I need to speak with my sister," I said clearly, unsure if this being understood English. "It's important. Urgent." The creature regarded me for a long moment, then made a gesture, arm extended, palm down, moving slowly toward the ground. "Wait. Stay." It disappeared into the darkness. I remained where I was, heart pounding. 20 minutes passed before I heard movement again, this time 2 sets of footsteps approaching. My flashlight revealed Jennifer, accompanied by the younger hidden one. "Kai? What are you doing here?" Her eyes were wide with concern. "Camera traps," I explained quickly. "Researchers are coming Monday to set them up all through this area. Wildlife study." Jennifer's expression darkened. She turned to her companion and made a series of vocalizations. The creature responded, its tone urgent. A rapid exchange followed. "This is bad," Jennifer said finally. "Very bad. They're in the middle of their migration to summer grounds. The entire community will be moving through those exact areas over the next week. Can they reroute? Take a different path?" She shook her head. "Not easily. The paths they follow are ancient, chosen for specific reasons: food sources, water, safe passage. Changing now with young ones and elders. It would be dangerous." "Then the cameras have to go," I said firmly. "Or at least be placed elsewhere." "How?" "You can't just tell them to move their research," I thought quickly. "Maybe not. But I can influence where they place the cameras. I'm their guide, after all. I could lead them to areas away from the migration routes." Jennifer translated this to the hidden one, who made a sound that seemed skeptical. "He says it's too risky. If even one camera captures clear evidence." "I know," I said. "But the alternative is to let them set up cameras exactly where your friends will be most exposed. At least my way, we have some control." The hidden one made another series of sounds, these more emphatic. "What did he say?" I asked. "He suggests sabotage, disabling the cameras after they're set up." I shook my head firmly. "No. That would raise suspicions immediately. They'd just replace them and start looking for who tampered with them. It would make things worse." More discussion followed, with Jennifer acting as translator. Finally, a compromise emerged. I would guide the researchers as planned, but subtly direct them away from the most critical migration paths. Meanwhile, the hidden ones would accelerate their movement, trying to get the most vulnerable members of their community through the highest risk areas before the cameras were operational. "I'll do everything I can," I promised. "But they need to be extremely cautious. These cameras have motion sensors and night vision." Jennifer nodded. "They understand technology better than you might think. They've been watching humans for generations." The hidden one approached me, stopping just a few feet away. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see details I'd missed before. The intelligence in those deep-set eyes, the subtle expressions that crossed its face. It reached out slowly and touched the necklace Jennifer had given me, then made a sound that seemed almost solemn. "A blessing," Jennifer translated, "and a request for protection." I nodded, meeting its gaze directly. "I'll protect them," I said, meaning it. On my return journey, Jennifer accompanied me part way, giving me more information about the hidden one's migration routes to help me plan where to divert the researchers. As we walked, I asked the question that had been burning in my mind since finding her. "Are you happy there, Jen?" Truly? She was silent for several steps before answering. Happy isn't quite the right word. Fulfilled, maybe. I'm part of something ancient and profound. I'm learning things humans have forgotten about, living in balance with the natural world. And I'm needed. They need someone who understands both worlds. But don't you miss anything? Hot showers, coffee, movies? She laughed softly. Sometimes. Chocolate, definitely. But the trade-offs. She gestured to the forest around us, bathed in moonlight. What I've gained is worth more than what I've lost. We reached the point where she would turn back. Be careful with these researchers, Kai. Some people can't handle having their worldview challenged. If they learn the truth, I'll be careful, I assured her. We'll get through this. But as I made my way back to my cabin alone, I couldn't shake a growing sense of foreboding. The hidden ones had remained undiscovered for centuries by being cautious, avoiding human contact, retreating when encroachment became too great. Now their security depended on me. A ranger who had sworn to uphold scientific research in the wilderness, I was tasked with protecting. The coming days would force me to choose between my duty as a ranger and my promise to my sister, with consequences I couldn't begin to predict. Monday morning arrived with a heavy mist shrouding the forest. I met the research team at headquarters as instructed, a professor from the state university and 2 graduate students, all eager to deploy their equipment in what they described as pristine predator habitat. Dr. Eleanor Morris was the team leader, a wildlife biologist with extensive experience studying large carnivores. Her students, Marcus and Ava, handled most of the technical equipment. We're particularly interested in the interaction between wolves and cougars in this ecosystem, Dr. Morris explained as we loaded their gear into my truck. Our camera traps have dual sensors, motion and heat signature, that should give us unprecedented data on predator movements and patterns. Fascinating, I said, trying to sound enthusiastic while my mind raced with concern. Heat signature detection would make it even more likely the cameras would capture the hidden ones. We've identified 20 optimal locations based on satellite imagery, she continued, showing me a map with marked points. My heart sank as I recognized several spots along the exact migration routes Jennifer had described. I've been patrolling these areas for months, I said, feigning expertise. If you're looking for predator activity, some of these locations might not be ideal. I could suggest alternatives based on what I've observed. Dr. Morris frowned slightly. Our site selection is based on scientific modeling, game trails, water sources, terrain features that channel animal movement. Of course, I nodded. But local knowledge can supplement those models. For instance, I pointed to several marks on her map. These areas have had unusual flooding this season, making them less traveled. And these, I indicated others, directly on the hidden ones' paths, have had recent landslides that have altered the game trails. It wasn't entirely a lie. There had been unusual weather patterns and some trails had been affected, just not exactly where I was indicating. Dr. Morris considered this. Interesting. Perhaps we should adjust some locations based on your input. Relief washed through me. Happy to help. I want your research to succeed. We spent the morning revising their camera placement plan. I managed to shift several critical locations away from the migration routes, though a few remained problematically close. By afternoon, we began the actual deployment, starting with the furthest sites and working our way back toward headquarters. At each location, Marcus and Ava set up the sophisticated camera traps, camouflaged boxes containing high-resolution cameras with motion and heat sensors, solar-powered batteries, and wireless transmission capabilities that would send images to their base station whenever triggered. These can detect a field mouse at 50 yards, Marcus said proudly as he calibrated one unit. If it moves and has a heat signature, we'll catch it. I watched them work, anxiety building. Despite my efforts, 3 cameras were positioned in areas the hidden ones would almost certainly pass through. I needed a contingency plan. As we finished setting up the last camera for the day, I noticed something unusual. Scratch marks on a nearby tree, fresh and deliberate. Not random animal clawing, but patterns. A message from the hidden ones, or perhaps Jennifer. I maneuvered to examine it while the researchers packed up their equipment. The marks formed a simple but clear pattern, lines indicating movement, a sun symbol, and what appeared to be a warning. They were accelerating their migration, trying to pass through before nightfall when the cameras would be most effective. "Everything okay, Ranger Stonewood?" Dr. Morris called, noticing my distraction. "Just checking some bear markings," I replied smoothly. "Nothing unusual." That evening, after escorting the team back to their temporary quarters at headquarters, I returned to the field alone, ostensibly to check on some remote campsites. In reality, I needed to assess the camera placements and look for signs of the Hidden One's passage. I found more scratch markings near the second camera site, urgent warnings that the young and elderly members of their community hadn't yet passed through. They would be moving through this area tonight, directly in front of a camera I couldn't disable without raising alarms. As darkness fell, I made a decision I hoped wouldn't cost me my job. Or worse, I positioned myself near the camera, waiting. If the Hidden Ones came through, I would need to obscure the camera's view somehow without obviously tampering with it. Hours passed. The forest grew quiet except for the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of nocturnal creatures. Then, around midnight, the silence deepened in that now familiar way that signaled their approach. I tensed, watching the trail. The first shadowy figure appeared, smaller than the adults I'd seen, moving with a slightly awkward gait. A child. Behind it came others, 5, then 10, then more, moving in a silent procession. Elders, from their slower movements, and mothers with young ones. The most vulnerable members of the community. They hadn't seen the camera, concealed as it was in the undergrowth. Any moment now they would pass directly in front of its sensors. I had seconds to decide. Moving as quietly as possible, I approached the camera from behind and accidentally bumped into it, knocking it slightly askew without disabling it. Then I stepped into its field of view, my flashlight blazing. "Hello there," I called loudly into the darkness, waving my light. "Anyone camping in this area? This is Ranger Stonewood doing a night check." The Hidden Ones froze momentarily, then melted back into the forest with remarkable speed and silence. I continued my charade for several minutes, making enough noise to ensure they had time to detour around the camera's range. The camera had certainly captured images of me conducting what would appear to be a routine patrol. It had missed the procession of cryptids by mere seconds. I repeated this performance at the other critical camera locations over the next 2 nights, finding ways to appear in front of the cameras at strategic times, creating distractions and noise that would warn the Hidden Ones of the camera's positions. It was exhausting and risky. Sooner or later, Dr. Morris would wonder why I kept appearing in their footage at odd hours. On the 4th day, as I helped the research team check their initial data, my fears were realized. "That's strange," Dr. Morris said, reviewing the footage on her laptop. "You seem to show up at nearly the same time each night at these 3 camera locations." I forced a casual shrug. "Just my patrol route. I like to be methodical." She gave me a searching look. "Every night? At midnight?" "The nocturnal predators are most active then. Best time to observe them." I tried to sound confident, professional. She turned back to her laptop. "Well, we're getting plenty of deer and small mammal activity, but no large predators yet. Unusual for an area reported to have healthy wolf and cougar populations." "Give it time," I suggested. "They're cautious creatures." Marcus, who had been reviewing footage from one of the cameras I hadn't been able to reach the previous night, suddenly sat up straight. "Dr. Morris, you need to see this." My stomach clenched as he turned his laptop toward her. On the screen was a nighttime image, grainy but distinctive, a tall, upright figure moving at the edge of the camera's range. Not clearly defined, but definitely not a bear or known wildlife. "What is that?" Dr. Morris asked, leaning forward. "I don't know," Marcus said, excitement creeping into his voice. "But look at the estimated height based on the reference markers we placed, at least 7 feet tall, moving bipedally." Dr. Morris looked at me. "Any large upright animals in these woods I should know about, Ranger?" I kept my expression neutral with effort. "Bears can stand on their hind legs, appear quite tall." "This isn't moving like a bear," Ava chimed in, coming to look over Dr. Morris's shoulder. "The gait is all wrong. And look at the proportions. Those are incredibly long arms." "Probably just a trick of the shadows," I suggested. "Infrared imagery can distort." Dr. Morris wasn't convinced. "We should set up additional cameras in this area. If there's an unidentified species..." "That's not necessary," I said quickly. Too quickly. "I mean, your study is focused on wolves and cougars. This is likely nothing. Nothing? She raised an eyebrow. Ranger Stonewood, if there's an unidentified large mammal in these woods, that's potentially groundbreaking. As a scientist, I can't just ignore this. Of course, I backpedaled. I just meant we shouldn't divert resources from your primary research. But if you want to investigate further, I'm happy to help. She studied me for a long moment. You know, you've been acting strangely since we arrived, almost as if you're trying to direct us away from certain areas. I felt cold sweat on my neck. I'm just trying to ensure your research is successful. I appreciate that. Her tone made it clear she didn't believe me. We'll continue as planned, with some additional coverage around this sighting location. That evening, I returned to my cabin in a state of high anxiety. The situation was unraveling. Soon, there would be more cameras specifically targeting the hidden ones, and I couldn't possibly interfere with all of them without raising even more suspicion. I needed to warn Jennifer and the others immediately. Using the code she'd taught me, I arranged sticks and stones near our meeting point to signal urgent danger. Then I waited, hoping she would check the location soon. 2 agonizing days passed before Jennifer appeared at my cabin under cover of darkness. They got an image, I told her without preamble. Not clear, but enough to make them curious. They're setting up more cameras specifically to look for your friends. Jennifer's face paled. This is what we've always feared. Once they have evidence, we need to do something quickly. They're expanding the camera network tomorrow. There's only one solution now, she said grimly. The community must leave this territory, immediately. Leave? But you said this was their ancestral land, that they've been here for generations. They've had to relocate before when humans drew too close. It's why they've survived this long. Her eyes were sad but resolute. The elders are already preparing. They've sensed this coming. Where will they go? There are other territories, more remote. Places they've used in times of danger before. She touched my arm. But Kai, I need your help for the transition. It's dangerous for them to move en masse, especially the young and old. What can I do? Create a distraction, something that will keep the researchers focused elsewhere for the next 48 hours. That's how long they need to disappear completely, I thought frantically. A wildfire would do it, but I can't risk that. Too dangerous, too many variables. What about a wildlife emergency? Something that would require all attention but wouldn't cause permanent harm? An idea formed. There's a remote camera station on the eastern boundary. If it detected a large predator, say a cougar, near popular hiking trails, protocols would require immediate attention. All research activities would be paused until the threat was assessed and hikers warned. Could you make that happen? I nodded slowly. I could report tracks and sightings. With my credentials, they'd have to respond. It would buy some time, maybe not 48 hours, but at least a day. It might be enough, Jennifer said. I'll tell the elders. They'll accelerate the relocation. As she turned to leave, I caught her arm. Jen, wait. If they leave, if they go somewhere more remote. I'm going with them, she said softly, confirming what I'd already known. I have to, Kai. They need me now more than ever. Will I ever see you again? Her eyes shimmered with tears. I don't know. Maybe, someday, when it's safe. I'll find a way to leave messages for you, places only you would know to look. I pulled her into a tight embrace, the reality hitting me that I might be losing my sister for a second time. Be safe. You too. What you're doing. The risks you're taking for them, for me. You're my sister, I said simply. And they're now part of what makes you who you are. I couldn't do anything else. After she left, I prepared for what would amount to a deliberate deception of my colleagues and superiors, falsifying reports of a predator threat to create a diversion. It could cost me my job, possibly even lead to criminal charges if discovered. But weighed against the exposure of the hidden ones, it seemed a small price to pay. The next morning, I put my plan into action, reporting clear evidence of a cougar frequenting the popular summit trail. I even planted convincing tracks using a cast I found in the ranger station's educational materials. As expected, Bernard immediately initiated emergency protocols, reassigning all available personnel to secure the area and warn hikers. "Dr. Morris, I'm afraid your research will have to be suspended temporarily," Bernard informed her. "We need all hands focusing on this potential predator threat." She was clearly frustrated but understood the priority of public safety. "For how long?" "At least 24 hours, possibly longer if we confirm the threat is real." It worked better than I'd hoped. The entire research team was pulled into the response, their camera monitoring temporarily forgotten. I used the opportunity to check on the hidden one's progress, finding signs that they were indeed moving quickly from the area. But on the second day, as the cougar scare began to wind down with no actual sightings confirmed, disaster struck. Ava, reviewing footage collected before the interruption, discovered something extraordinary. "Dr. Morris," she called out during the evening briefing at headquarters, "you need to see this immediately." On her laptop screen was an image that made my blood run cold, a clear, unmistakable shot of one of the hidden ones. Not a distant, blurry figure that could be dismissed as a bear or trick of light, but a detailed image of an adult male looking directly at the camera with obvious intelligence. The proportions, the features, the fur, all clearly visible. Undeniable evidence. "My God," Dr. Morris breathed. Is this what I think it is?" Bernard leaned over her shoulder, his expression confused. "What am I looking at? Some kind of hoax?" "This is no hoax," Dr. Morris said firmly. "The timestamp and location data are intact. This was captured by our camera 2 nights ago." She looked up, excitement blazing in her eyes. "Gentlemen, I believe we've just documented the first conclusive evidence of a North American great ape, a Sasquatch, Bigfoot." The room erupted in a mixture of excitement, disbelief, and questions. I stood frozen, watching as my worst fears materialized. In the chaos, I slipped outside, desperate for air and a chance to think. The damage was done. Within hours, Dr. Morris would share this image with her university colleagues. Soon after, it would reach the media. Teams of researchers, hunters, thrill seekers, they would flood these woods, searching for the hidden ones. Even if Jennifer and the community managed to escape this territory, the hunt would spread. Their secret, preserved for millennia, was about to be exposed. Unless I could still find a way to stop it. I returned to the meeting room with a desperate plan forming. Dr. Morris was already on her satellite phone, excitedly describing the discovery to a colleague. Bernard looked shocked, unsure whether to believe what he was seeing. "Dr. Morris," I interrupted, "before you share that image more widely, I need to speak with you. Privately." She hesitated, then excused herself from her call. "What is it, Ranger Stonewood?" "I'm rather busy at the moment, as you can imagine." I led her to a quiet corner of the building. "That image. I need to tell you something about it." "Oh?" Her excitement was tempered with sudden wariness. "What about it?" "It's not real," I said flatly. "I faked it." "Excuse me?" Her eyes widened. "I created a costume, had a friend wear it. We staged the image as a prank on your team. I never imagined you'd actually believe it was real." The lies felt bitter on my tongue. "I'm incredibly sorry. It was unprofessional and stupid." Dr. Morris stared at me in disbelief. "That's impossible. The heat signature, the proportions, no costume could fool our equipment so completely." "Advanced materials," I improvised. "My friend works in special effects. The suit has heating elements to simulate body temperature. Please, Dr. Morris, if this gets out, when the hoax is inevitably discovered, your reputation will be damaged. The university's reputation. It's better to end this now." Her expression hardened. "Show me the costume then. Prove what you're saying." "I can't. My friend took it when he left. But I can show you where we staged the photo. You'll see the tracks where we set everything up." She studied me for a long moment, her scientific skepticism clearly at war with the enormity of what I was suggesting. "Why would you do this? Risk your career for a childish prank?" I looked down, feigning shame. "It was stupid. I was frustrated with how the research was disrupting my routines, the wildlife. I never thought it would go this far." "I don't believe you," she said finally. "The image analysis shows no signs of fakery. And your behavior throughout our time here, the strange patrols, redirecting our camera placements, It all makes sense now. You weren't playing a prank. You were trying to protect something. My heart sank. She was too smart, too observant to be fooled by my desperate lie. And now I'd only made things worse, confirming her suspicions that something extraordinary was happening in these woods. "The truth, Ranger Stonewood," she demanded. "Now. Or I make this call, and by tomorrow this forest will be overrun with researchers and media." I was cornered, out of options. The truth was all I had left, or at least a version of it. "There is something in these woods," I admitted quietly. "Something extraordinary, but exposing it would be disastrous, not just for them, but potentially for us." Her expression shifted from anger to intense curiosity. "Go on." "They've lived here in secret for thousands of years. They're intelligent, Dr. Morris. They have culture, communication, knowledge we can barely comprehend, and they want to be left alone." "You've seen them, interacted with them." It wasn't a question. I nodded. "They trust me to an extent. They showed themselves because they sensed a kindred spirit, someone who respects the wilderness as they do." "And you've kept this to yourself? The greatest biological discovery of the century?" "Because it's not our discovery to make," I said firmly. "They're not specimens to be studied or exhibited. They're a people who've chosen isolation for their own protection. If you expose them now, you'll be signing their death warrant. Is that the legacy you want for your research?" Dr. Morris was silent, processing my words. Science was her life, discovery her passion, but ethics also guided her work. I could see the conflict in her eyes. "What are you asking me to do?" she finally asked. "Delete the image. Tell your team it was corrupted or misidentified. Continue your predator research as planned, but leave them in peace. Let them disappear back into myth and legend, where they've survived all this time." "And if I don't? If I believe the scientific community deserves to know the truth?" I took a deep breath. "Then I can't stop you. But know that you'll be responsible for whatever happens next. To them, and to this forest." The weight of the decision hung between us. Dr. Morris looked away, toward the window that framed the dark forest beyond. "I need time to think," she said at last. "This isn't a simple choice." "It's all I can ask," I replied. That night, as I returned to my cabin, the forest seemed abnormally still. No night birds called, no creatures rustled in the underbrush. The hidden ones were gone. I could feel their absence like a physical thing. Jennifer with them vanished once again into wilderness too remote for humans to easily follow. I sat on my porch until dawn, waiting for a sign, a call, anything that might indicate their presence lingered. But there was only silence. As the first light broke over the eastern mountains, I heard a vehicle approaching. Dr. Morris's Jeep appeared on the access road, coming to a stop in front of my cabin. She got out, looking as though she hadn't slept either. "I've made my decision," she said without preamble. I stood, bracing myself for whatever came next, the end of my career or perhaps the beginning of a new understanding between humans and the hidden ones. The future of two worlds hung in the balance, waiting for her next words. "The forest has a way of calling to you when you've been away too long. It sends whispers through the leaves, carriers of memories, reminders of a simpler existence. That's what I told myself when I applied for the ranger position at Whispering Pines National Park, that it was the forest calling me home. What I didn't realize was that sometimes, when the forest calls, something else might be listening. My name is Riverstone. I inherited the name from my grandmother, who claimed our ancestors had communed with the spirits of the wilderness long before settlers arrived with their maps and claims. The name felt right for this new chapter in my life. Authentic, connected to the earth, unlike the corporate desk job I'd abandoned in Seattle. The ranger station sat on the edge of Mirror Lake, a pristine body of water that reflected the surrounding pines and distant mountain peaks with such clarity it sometimes disoriented visitors. A modest log cabin served as both office and living quarters for whoever drew the assignment to this remote outpost. The previous ranger had left suddenly. Family emergency was the official reason given, though the regional supervisor's tone suggested there was more to the story. "You understand this posting is unique," Supervisor Kelly had said during my interview, adjusting her glasses nervously. 30 miles from the nearest town. Radio contact only when weather permits. Most rangers request transfers within a year. I'm not most rangers, I replied with confidence I didn't entirely feel. Solitude is exactly what I'm looking for. She'd studied me carefully before sliding the assignment papers across her desk. Well, you've got the qualifications, and honestly, we're short-staffed. Just remember to follow protocols, especially regarding wildlife encounters. The station was positioned deep in the backcountry, with unpopular trails that rarely saw visitors. Perfect for someone trying to escape the noise of civilization. My first week passed uneventfully, checking trail conditions, cataloging wildlife sightings, and settling into the quiet rhythm of forest life. The cabin wasn't luxurious, but it had everything I needed. A wood stove, a small kitchen, a shower with surprisingly good water pressure, a desk for reports, and a comfortable bed tucked into a corner beneath a window that framed the night sky. The walls were decorated with maps of the territory and faded photographs of past rangers standing proudly in front of the cabin, their faces gradually becoming more serious as the years progressed. My only companions were the books left behind by previous occupants, field guides, wilderness survival manuals, and a surprising collection of folklore and cryptozoology texts that seemed out of place among the scientific literature. One book in particular caught my attention. Shadow Tracks, Unexplained Phenomena of the Northern Forests. The corners were dog-eared and margin notes filled the pages in different handwritings as if multiple rangers had contributed their thoughts over the years. 2 weeks into my assignment, I received my first visitors. A beat-up Land Rover pulled up to the station just as I was finishing my morning coffee. 2 people emerged, a tall, bearded man with weather-worn skin and a shorter woman with bright red hair braided down her back. "G'day there," the woman called out with a distinctly Australian accent. "You must be the new ranger we've heard about. Word travels fast in the wilderness," I replied, extending my hand. "Riverstone." "Maya Collins," she said, giving my hand a firm shake. "This silent bloke here is Liam Fletcher. We're researchers from the University of Melbourne on sabbatical studying comparative forest ecosystems." Liam nodded, offering a quiet, "Nice to meet you," as he unloaded equipment from the vehicle. "We've got permits to set up research stations in the eastern quadrant," Maya continued, producing the paperwork. "We've been working with the Park Service for months." I reviewed their documentation, which seemed in order. "You're planning to stay out there. How long?" 6 weeks, give or take," Maya replied. "We've done this before at Olympic and Redwood. Got all the gear and supplies we need." "Well, I should warn you, that's a remote area. I'll need to radio in your position daily, and you should check in by sunset." Maya laughed. "Worried we'll need rescuing? We're fairly self-sufficient. Did some wilderness medicine training before coming." I wasn't amused. Protocol exists for a reason. This park has its challenges. "What kind of challenges?" Liam spoke up, suddenly interested. The question caught me off guard. I thought about the strange notes in the margins of that book, the unexplained resignation of my predecessor, the warning in Supervisor Kelly's voice. Weather changes quickly. Navigation can be tricky when fog rolls in, and there's wildlife to consider. "Bears?" Maya asked. "Among other things," I replied vaguely. "Just stick to the protocol and we'll all sleep better." That evening, after the Australians had departed for their research site, I found myself drawn back to Shadow Tracks. I flipped through the chapters on regional phenomena until I found a section heavily annotated in blue ink. The indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest spoke of a creature that walked between worlds, neither man nor beast, but something ancient that claimed the deepest forests as its territory. Early settlers dismissed these tales as superstition. Yet reports persist of encounters with an entity that stands upright like a man, but moves with the stealth of a predator. A handwritten note in the margin simply read, "I heard it last night, 3 knocks, always 3. I closed the book and glanced out the window. The sun had set, casting the forest in deep shadow. For the first time since arriving, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I made sure the doors were locked before turning in that night. The dream came without warning. I stood at the edge of Mirror Lake under a moonless sky. The water was black glass, reflecting nothing. From across the lake came a sound I'd never heard before, not quite animal, not quite human, a sustained vocalization that seemed to vibrate through my bones. In the dream, I knew I should run, but my feet remained rooted as a massive silhouette emerged from the tree line opposite my position. I woke with a gasp, sheets damp with sweat. The bedside clock read 3:17 a.m. Outside, an owl called once, then fell silent. As I lay there trying to calm my breathing, I heard it. 3 distinct knocks, as if something solid had struck the wood of the cabin's exterior wall. 1, 2, 3. Morning brought rational thought back into focus, as it often does after a night of unexplained noises. I convinced myself the knocking had been a branch swaying in the wind, perhaps a raccoon investigating the cabin's exterior. The dream I attributed to the suggestive reading material and an overactive imagination. I spent the morning on patrol, hiking the main trail that circled Mirror Lake. The forest was alive with spring activity. Birds called from the canopy, squirrels bounded between trees, and wildflowers added splashes of color to the forest floor. Everything seemed perfectly normal, until I found the footprint. It was in a patch of mud near the eastern shore, half filled with water, but unmistakably a footprint, and not one made by any standard hiking boot. It measured nearly 18 inches from heel to toe, with 5 distinct toe impressions clearly visible in the soft earth. Too large for a human, too distinctly foot-shaped for a bear. My ranger training told me to document and report. I photographed the print from multiple angles, placed a compass beside it for scale, and carefully recorded its location in my notebook. Then I made a plaster cast, following procedure while trying to ignore the growing unease in my stomach. I'd heard stories from other rangers and wilderness workers about strange footprints found in remote areas, but like most, I'd written them off as hoaxes or misidentifications. Now, holding the cast in my hands, those dismissals felt hollow. The radio crackled to life as I was heading back to the station. "Base, this is Research Team Alpha. Do you copy? Over." Maya's voice sounded strained even through the static. "This is Base. Go ahead, Alpha. Over. We've had a situation at camp, equipment damaged overnight. Wondering if you've had problems with aggressive wildlife in this sector." Over. I hesitated before responding. "What kind of damage are we talking about?" Over. "Camera traps torn from trees, equipment scattered, and there are prints around the perimeter. Not bear, not human. Liam thinks, well, it doesn't matter what he thinks. We'd appreciate if you could come take a look." Over. I gave her my coordinates and promised to reach their camp by mid-afternoon. Before heading out, I locked the plaster cast in the station's evidence cabinet and retrieved the high-powered rifle that stayed mounted behind my desk. Standard protocol for investigating wildlife disturbances, I told myself, ignoring the fact that I rarely carried it on routine patrols. The hike to the research camp took 2 hours at a brisk pace. As I moved deeper into the eastern quadrant, the forest grew denser, the canopy blocking much of the sunlight and creating a perpetual twilight on the forest floor. The birdsong that had accompanied me near the lake gradually faded, replaced by an unsettling silence, broken only by the sound of my boots on the pine needle carpet. I smelled the smoke from their campfire before I saw the site. 2 large tents, a covered research area with tables of equipment, and a small fire pit surrounded by logs for seating. Maya was sorting through damaged equipment when I arrived, while Liam crouched at the edge of their clearing, examining something on the ground. "Thanks for coming," Maya said, the usual cheerfulness absent from her voice. "It happened around 2 a.m. Woke us both up. Sounded like something large moving around the camp, knocking things over." "Did you see anything?" She shook her head. "Too dark. Liam tried to get a torch, but by the time he got outside, whatever it was had gone. But it left evidence." I walked over to where Liam was kneeling. He'd been making his own plaster casts of tracks, identical to the one I'd found by the lake. "These are all around the camp," he said quietly. "A complete circuit, like it was examining our setup from every angle." "I've documented similar prints near the lake," I admitted. 18 inches long, 5 toes, bipedal gait. "Sasquatch," Liam said matter-of-factly. "Or Bigfoot, as Americans call it." I would have laughed if the evidence hadn't been literally set in stone before me. Let's not jump to conclusions. There are bears in these woods that occasionally walk on hind legs, Bears don't have feet like this, Liam interrupted, pointing to the distinct toe impressions. And they don't selectively destroy camera equipment. That detail stopped me. What do you mean selectively? Maya led me to their research table. We had 6 camera traps set up. All were torn from their mountings and the memory cards removed. Not damaged, removed. The cameras themselves were left behind. Something didn't want to be photographed, Liam added, joining us at the table. The implication hung in the air between us, that whatever had visited their camp possessed not just strength but intelligence. The kind of intelligence that understood what cameras were and how to disable them. You need to relocate your camp, I said finally. Move closer to the station until we figure out what we're dealing with. Figure out? Maya laughed nervously. Mate, I think we know exactly what we're dealing with. The question is whether you're ready to admit it. Before I could respond, a sound echoed through the forest. A long, wailing cry that started low and rose to a pitch that sent birds exploding from the trees. It wasn't a wolf or a cougar. It wasn't anything I recognized from my years of wilderness experience. That wail didn't sound human, Liam whispered, his face pale. I know what elk, coyote, and wolf calls sound like, and this was nowhere near those. We listened in tense silence until the forest returned to its normal state. Pack up, I ordered, no longer concerned about overreacting. We leave in 30 minutes. As they gathered their essential equipment, I radioed the regional office, hoping to reach Supervisor Kelly. Instead, I got Jenkins, the weekend dispatcher. Unusual wildlife activity? He repeated after I'd explained the situation without mentioning Bigfoot. No reports from other sectors, probably just a curious bear. Follow standard protocol and file a report when you return to base. I think we need additional personnel, I pressed, at least until we identify what we're dealing with. No can-do, Stone. We're stretched thin with the wildfires up north. You'll have to handle it yourself until Kelly's back on Monday. I signed off, feeling increasingly isolated. With Maya and Liam in tow, I started back toward the station, unable to shake the sensation that we were being watched from the shadow of the trees. The journey back took longer, burdened as we were with equipment. Dusk was approaching by the time the lake came into view, its surface painted orange and gold by the setting sun. The beauty of it provided momentary relief from the tension that had built throughout the day. That relief was short-lived. As we approached the cabin, I noticed immediately that something was wrong. The door stood ajar, swinging slightly in the breeze. Wait here, I instructed, drawing my rifle and approaching cautiously. The interior of the cabin had been thoroughly searched. Drawers hung open, items scattered across the floor. My desk had been cleared, papers strewn everywhere. But most disturbing of all, the evidence cabinet had been pried open and the plaster cast I'd made that morning was gone. Someone broke in and took the cast. Maya's voice rose in pitch. Why would anyone do that? We stood in the disheveled cabin as daylight faded, the implications of the break-in settling over us like a cold mist. The station was supposed to be my sanctuary, the safe harbor in these woods. Now that sense of security had been violently stripped away. Not someone, Liam said quietly, examining the door frame. Look at these marks. Deep gouges scarred the wood around the lock, as if powerful fingers had simply peeled the door open. No human hand could have generated that kind of force. We need to get help, Maya insisted, pulling out her satellite phone. After a moment of attempted connection, she lowered it with a frown. No signal, that's impossible. We tested it this morning. I tried the radio again with the same result, nothing but static across all channels. We were effectively cut off from outside contact. We need to leave, Maya said, already gathering her essentials. Hike out tonight. That's 30 miles through dense forest in the dark, I reminded her. We'd be lucky to make 5 miles before total darkness, and then we'd be vulnerable in unfamiliar territory. Vulnerable? Liam repeated. More vulnerable than sitting in a cabin with broken locks? He had a point, but leaving meant abandoning my post, something that went against every aspect of my training. I was responsible for this territory, for maintaining control over this situation, however bizarre it had become. We'll secure the cabin as best we can tonight, I decided. At first light, we hike out together. I have emergency flares and a detailed map of the fastest route to the highway. Neither seemed entirely satisfied with this plan, but they recognized the logic. We worked quickly to barricade the door and windows, using furniture and the limited tools available. I kept the rifle close, though I wondered what good it would do against something powerful enough to tear a reinforced door from its hinges. As night descended fully, we huddled in the main room, a lantern between us casting long shadows on the walls. None of us mentioned the creature directly, as if naming it might somehow summon it from the darkness outside. "I've heard stories." Liam finally broke the tense silence. "From indigenous guides in British Columbia. They said the forest people avoid human contact except when territory is threatened, or when they're curious about newcomers." "These aren't stories anymore," Maya replied, her voice tight. "This is happening, documented evidence by 3 witnesses." "Evidence that's being systematically removed," I pointed out. "The memory cards, the plaster cast. It's intelligent enough to understand what could prove its existence." "Or someone else is removing the evidence," Liam suggested. "Someone who doesn't want the creature documented." Before I could consider this new theory, a sound from outside silenced us all. Heavy footsteps circling the cabin, unhurried and deliberate. The wooden walls creaked as something pressed against them, testing their strength. We froze, barely breathing, as the steps completed a full circuit and then stopped directly outside the barricaded door. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the footsteps. The waiting, knowing something was there, listening, perhaps even smelling our fear. Then came the knocks, 3 distinct impacts against the door that shook dust from the ceiling. 1, 2, 3. "What does it want?" Maya whispered, clutching Liam's arm. The answer came as a low, rumbling vocalization. Not words, but something that contained patterns, inflections that suggested language rather than animal calls. The hair on my arm stood on end as I recognized the sound from my dream. "I think," I said slowly, "it's telling us to leave." The night passed in a state of hypervigilance. The creature didn't attempt to break through our barricades, but we could hear it moving around the cabin periodically, a constant reminder of our precarious situation. None of us slept more than minutes at a time. Dawn brought no relief. A dense fog had settled over the lake and surrounding forest, reducing visibility to mere feet beyond the windows. The perfect conditions for an ambush, I thought grimly. "We can't wait for better weather," I told the others, as we gathered our essentials for the hike out. "Stay together, move quickly, and don't stop for anything." We stepped outside into the swirling mist. The world around us transformed into a ghostly landscape of half-visible trees and distorted shapes. The rifle felt reassuring in my hands, though I'd begun to doubt its effectiveness against what we were facing. Our planned route would take us along the main trail for 8 miles before connecting to an access road that rangers used for supply deliveries. From there, it would be another 20 miles to the highway, but on clearer terrain where we could make better time. The fog muffled our footsteps as we moved single file along the narrow path, Maya between Liam and me. Every few minutes, I would stop to listen, trying to detect any sounds that didn't belong to the 3 of us. 2 hours into our journey, the trail began to climb a ridge that would eventually lead us to higher, hopefully clearer ground. The exertion of the uphill trek and the growing warmth of day began to burn off some of the fog, giving us glimpses of the forest around us. That's when I felt it. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. Not just observed, but hunted. I signaled for the others to stop, raising the rifle and scanning our surroundings. "What is it?" Maya whispered. Before I could answer, a massive tree trunk came crashing down across the trail 30 feet ahead of us, blocking our path. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the canyon. "Back," I ordered, turning to retrace our steps, only to find another tree now lay across the trail behind us. We were trapped in a section of path no more than 30 feet long. "It was deliberate," Liam said, his voice shaking. "It's hurting us." From the slope above came the sound of movement, branches breaking, rocks dislodging. Something large was descending toward us. Through gaps in the foliage, I caught glimpses of dark fur, of a mass greater than any bear I'd encountered. "The slope," I decided quickly. "Down toward the stream. It's steep but passable." We scrambled down the hillside, half sliding through loose dirt and pine needles, grabbing at saplings to control our descent. The stream below glittered through the trees, offering a potential escape route. Water would mask our scent, making us harder to track. I was halfway down when I heard Maya cry out. Looking back, I saw she had slipped and was now sliding uncontrolled toward a rocky outcropping. I lunged, catching her hand just before she would have gone over, the rifle clattering down the slope in the process. "I've got you," I assured her, pulling her to more stable ground. That's when I saw it, standing on the trail above us, partially obscured by mist and foliage, but unmistakably there. A massive, upright figure covered in dark fur, watching us with eyes that reflected intelligence no animal should possess. It was enormous, at least 7 feet tall, with long, powerful arms that hung at its sides and a face that resembled something between human and ape, yet was entirely its own species. Our eyes met across the distance, and in that moment, I felt something I hadn't expected, not just fear, but recognition, as if this creature and I had encountered each other before, perhaps in dreams or some ancient memory. It raised one massive hand, not in threat, but in a gesture almost like a warning, before turning and disappearing into the forest with surprising grace for its size. "Did you see that?" Liam gasped, having reached the stream below. "Did you bloody see that?" I helped Maya the rest of the way down the slope, my mind racing to process what had just happened. The creature could have easily attacked us. Instead, it had merely blocked our path, forced us to change direction. But why? The answer came to me as we reached the stream, and I oriented myself using the sun's position. "It's driving us east," I realized, away from the access road. "Away from escape, you mean?" Maya said, shivering despite the growing warmth of the day. "No," I said slowly, a theory forming. "I think it's protecting us from something else." The stream led us deeper into the eastern section of the park, an area I hadn't fully explored during my short tenure. According to my maps, we were approaching a series of ancient rock formations that local tribes had once considered sacred ground. If we followed the stream for another few miles, it would eventually connect with a fire road that could still lead us to safety, assuming we weren't intercepted again. My companions were understandably shaken after our encounter on the ridge. Liam kept scanning the forest around us, jumping at every sound, while Maya maintained a grim silence, limping slightly from her fall. "Do you still have your satellite phone?" I asked her as we paused to refill our water bottles from the stream. She checked her pack and nodded. "Still no signal, though." "Keep trying every half hour," I instructed. "We might get lucky as the terrain changes." We continued along the stream bed, the water sometimes rising to our knees as the channel narrowed between rocky walls. The physical labor of wading against the current helped distract from the constant anxiety of being pursued, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being guided rather than hunted. By mid-afternoon, the stream valley opened into a broader clearing dominated by a massive rock formation, a natural arch of weathered sandstone that spanned nearly 60 feet. Beneath it, protected from the elements, ancient pictographs covered the rock face in faded red and black pigments. "This wasn't on any of the park literature," Maya said, approaching the paintings with professional interest despite our situation. The images depicted human figures alongside larger, more imposing silhouettes that walked upright, but were clearly not human. Other symbols suggested seasonal cycles, migration patterns, and territorial boundaries. The local tribes called them forest guardians, I explained, recalling information from the books in the cabin. Stories described them as ancient beings that protected sacred lands from those who would desecrate them. "Like what? Hikers? Researchers?" Liam asked nervously. "Or development," I suggested. "Mining. Logging. The eastern border of the park has been contested for years. There's pressure to open it for resource extraction." A sudden realization hit me. My predecessor left suddenly after filing reports opposing a mining survey in this exact region. The official record says family emergency, but what if he encountered what we did and tried to warn people? Maya finished my thought. I remembered the book of unexplained phenomena, the margin notes from different rangers over the years. They hadn't been crazy. They'd been documenting, protecting, not just the park, but the secret it contained. The shadows lengthened as afternoon turned to evening. We couldn't risk continuing in darkness, so we made camp beneath the stone arch, figuring it offered some protection and visibility in multiple directions. Without the rifle, Our only defenses were a cooking knife and the emergency flares I'd brought. As we gathered firewood, I spotted something that had been deliberately placed at the base of one of the pictographs, a small pile of fresh berries, a handful of nuts, and most surprisingly, my missing plaster cast, intact and placed carefully on a bed of moss. "It's returning what it took," Liam observed as I showed them the items. "Maybe as a peace offering. Or it's telling us it knows exactly who we are and where we've been," Maya countered, less optimistic. I studied the cast, running my fingers over the impression of 5 toes. "I think it's saying this territory is significant. The pictographs, the offerings, this place matters." As darkness fell completely, we huddled around our small fire, taking turns keeping watch. The forest around us hummed with nocturnal life. Owls calling, small creatures rustling in the underbrush, the continuous gurgle of the stream. Normal sounds that somehow failed to reassure. It was during my watch near midnight that I heard it again. The 3 knocks, this time against the stone arch itself, resonating like a bell through the clearing. 1, 2, 3. I stood slowly, moving away from my sleeping companions toward the edge of our firelight. "I know you're there," I called softly. "I understand what you're protecting." Silence answered me, but I felt its presence, a shifting in the darkness, a concentration of shadow that suggested mass and form. "The mining operation," I continued. "I'll help stop it. That's what rangers do. We protect the park too." A branch snapped as something moved closer. I held my ground, fighting every instinct to run. From the darkness came a low vocalization, that same pattern of sounds I'd heard at the cabin, but softer now, almost conversational. It was communicating, even if I couldn't understand the specific message. "I need to get my friends to safety," I explained, as if it could comprehend. "Then I'll return. I promise." The air shifted as something large moved at the periphery of our camp. Through the dancing shadows cast by the fire, I glimpsed massive shoulders, a powerful form circling our position. Not threatening, but evaluating. When it finally emerged into partial visibility, I understood why legends of these creatures had persisted for centuries. It stood fully upright, nearly 8 feet tall, its body covered in dark fur that moved like silk with each breath. Its face remained in shadow, but I could feel its gaze assessing me with ancient intelligence. It raised one massive hand, palm forward, and then deliberately pointed east, deeper into the territory we'd been traversing. Then it indicated the pictographs with the same hand, connecting the modern gesture with the ancient images. "You want us to go that way?" I asked, pointing in the same direction. The creature made a single, affirmative motion, not quite a nod, but clear in its meaning. "Why should we trust you?" Maya's voice came from behind me. She had woken and now stood at my shoulder, her initial fear giving way to cautious curiosity. In response, the creature slowly reached into what appeared to be a crude pouch of woven plant fibers hanging at its side. It withdrew something that glinted in the firelight, Maya's missing memory cards, undamaged and carefully stored. It placed them on a flat rock at the edge of our camp, then backed away into the shadows, maintaining eye contact with me until the darkness swallowed its form completely. Maya rushed forward to retrieve the cards. "They're all here," she confirmed, amazed. "Every single one." By morning, Liam had also witnessed the creature's return, and a tense debate ensued about our next move. Follow its directions deeper into unknown territory or attempt to find our own way out. "These beings aren't aggressive," I argued, recalling details from the ranger accounts I'd read. "There are hundreds of documented encounters where they've observed humans without attacking. They're territorial, yes, but intelligent enough to distinguish between threats and non-threats." "And you think it's categorized us as non-threats?" Liam asked skeptically. "I think it's asking for our help," I replied. "The mining operation threatens this sacred area. If we can document what's here, the pictographs, the ecosystem, maybe even evidence of the creatures themselves with their cooperation, we might be able to stop it permanently." Maya examined her recovered memory cards thoughtfully. "We came here to study forest ecosystems. This goes far beyond our research parameters." "But imagine the significance," Liam countered, his scientific curiosity finally overcoming his fear. "An undocumented intelligent species that's coexisted with humans for thousands of years. protecting ancient lands from exploitation. The decision crystallized as I listened to them debate. This was why I'd become a ranger, not just to guide tourists or maintain trails, but to protect wilderness and all it contained, especially that which couldn't protect itself through conventional means. "I'm continuing east," I announced, following the creature's directions. "You two can head south to the fire road. It's about 7 miles from here. I'll mark the trail clearly for you." Maya and Liam exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. "We came for research," Maya said finally. "This seems like the discovery of a lifetime. We're with you." Our journey deeper into the Eastern Territory revealed a landscape few human eyes had seen. Pristine valleys untouched by trails, ancient groves where trees had grown undisturbed for centuries, and finally, as the sun began to set on our third day, a hidden valley nestled between 2 mountain ridges. The valley floor housed a complex ecosystem, unlike anything in the documented portions of the park. Plant species I didn't recognize, unusual rock formations that created natural shelters, and unmistakable signs of intelligent habitation. Simple structures of woven branches stood near freshwater sources. Paths had been cleared between fruit-bearing trees and edible plant colonies. It wasn't civilization as humans defined it, but it was unquestionably the home of beings that understood their environment and shaped it to their needs. And they were watching us. Not just one creature now, but many, moving through the trees around the valley's edge, observing our reactions to their sanctuary. I counted at least 5 distinct figures before realizing the futility of the effort. This was their stronghold, and they controlled every aspect of our presence here. "They're a family group," Liam whispered in awe. "Multiple generations, based on the size variations." Maya had been documenting everything with her remaining cameras. "There must be at least 20 individuals," she estimated, far more than any previously theorized population density. As darkness fell, we made camp at the valley's entrance, careful to disturb nothing. The creatures maintained their distance but remained visible, a clear shift in behavior that suggested trust, or at least acceptance of our presence. Near midnight, as we sat quietly around our small fire, the largest of the creatures approached. Others followed, creating a semicircle just beyond the firelight. Their leader, for that seemed to be its role, carried something wrapped in large leaves. With deliberate movements, it unwrapped the package, revealing fragments of rock-bearing drill marks and the unmistakable residue of exploratory mining, evidence of illegal incursions into protected land. "They don't just want our help," I realized aloud. "They need it. They can't file reports or bring legal challenges. They need human allies who understand both worlds." The creature extended its massive hand, offering the evidence. In that moment, I understood my purpose with perfect clarity. I hadn't come to Whispering Pines by chance or merely to escape my former life. Perhaps the forest really had been calling me, preparing me for this alliance. As I accepted the package, our eyes met again, and I felt that same sense of recognition, as if our species had once worked together long ago and might do so again, bridging an ancient divide for a common purpose. We spent 7 more days in the valley, gathering evidence of both the illegal mining activities and the unique ecosystem that needed protection. The creatures, which I had begun to think of simply as the guardians, led us to sites where exploratory drilling had damaged ancient structures and contaminated water sources. Maya and Liam documented everything meticulously, creating a scientific record that would be impossible to dismiss. I focused on mapping the incursions and collecting physical evidence that would compel law enforcement action. On our final night in the valley, I sat alone by our fire, contemplating our return to civilization and the challenges ahead. The largest of the guardians approached, no longer hesitant in my presence, and settled its massive form on the ground nearby. "We'll make them listen," I promised, knowing that even if it couldn't understand my exact words, it comprehended my commitment. "This place will remain protected." It made that now familiar vocalization, complex patterned sounds that resonated with meaning just beyond my comprehension. Then it reached out one massive hand and gently touched the ranger badge on my shirt, acknowledging our shared purpose across the species divide. When we finally hiked out of the wilderness 2 weeks after our original departure from the cabin, we carried with us evidence that would change the park forever, and perhaps our understanding of what it means to share this planet with other intelligent life. The illegal mining operation was shut down within months. The Eastern Territory was designated a special conservation zone with restricted access, officially to protect sensitive archaeological sites and unique ecosystems. I remained at Whispering Pines, no longer seeking solitude, but embracing my role as intermediary between worlds. On quiet nights, I still hear the 3 knocks on my cabin wall. Not a warning now, but a greeting between guardians of ancient lands. 1, 2, 3. They remind me that sometimes when the forest calls, something ancient and wise is indeed listening, and sometimes it calls back.